We are now live. Sound check. Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee meeting for Thursday, September 22nd, 2022. Sound check.
Morning, Madam Clerk. Thank you for that. And welcome, everyone. Just be sure we have quorum. So I see we have Councillor Brenda Johnson, Councillor Russ Powers, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Wilson, and Councillor Clark is in chambers, and myself as chair. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Members of the public are advised this is Audit and Finance and Administration meeting of September 22nd. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website, that any presentations and reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website, and that members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternate format. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to non-audible function during committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during the meeting, and members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions. The quorum is present. There are no ceremonial activities today. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair. There are 2 added delegation requests for today's meeting respecting item 10.5, the Governance Review Subcommittee Report 22-004, one from Carl Andrus, Hamilton Community Benefits Network, who would like to delegate in person, and one from Tamir Kwazem, who would like to delegate virtually. There is also an additional item 9.1A, which is staff supporting documentation for Nicholas Morris's delegation respecting an appeal of the city's decision regarding claim number 061628.
Thank you for that. May I have a mover and a second to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Powers, second by Councillor Ferguson. Record vote, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none. May I have an approval of the minutes of the previous meeting of September 8th, moved by Councillor Brenda Johnson, second by Councillor Wilson.
Absolutely. And that carries 6-0.
Thank you. Under communications, we have item 5.1 is Hamilton Waterfront Trust 2021 audited financial statements. Recommendations to be received. May I have a mover and a seconder to put it on the floor? Councillor Wilson's going to move it. Councillor Wilson? And I guess you want to speak. Thank you. And Councillor Ferguson seconds. Councillor Wilson, go ahead.
My apologies. Thank you, Chairperson. If I could, through you to Mr. Zagarek, this has been a long, protracted conversation that we've had on the status of the Hamilton Waterfront Trust audited statements and our responsibility in their overview. So the recommendation here, Chairperson, as you know, is to be received. Again, if I could ask through you to staff, is it the responsibility of this body to do more than that? And is that the requirement that is to be actioned from this body? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zagarek.
Through the chair, Mike Zagarek, General Manager of Finance Corporate Services. I'll start and then I'll invite our legislative coordinator, Angela, to speak to the communications she's forwarded on to the Hamilton Waterfront Trust. With respect to the reporting requirements, annual reporting requirements from the trust to the City of Hamilton includes the audited financial statements, a strategic plan, I believe a business plan, as well as any changes to the organizational structure of Hamilton Waterfront Trust. I'll also just provide an update as to the direction we received through Audit, Finance, Admin, and Council, and that was to convene meetings with Hamilton Waterfront Trust as it relates to their previous communication to Audit, Finance, Admin with respect to their mandate, and that communication suggested the Hamilton Waterfront Trust Board were discussing a change in their mandate. Those, because of some scheduling challenges, we have scheduled those meetings for end of September. first week of October. And in addition to inviting Hamilton Waterfront Trust representatives and city representatives, I too have engaged with KPMG Consulting Services to be a listening body to that conversation in order to provide some guidance to the city of Hamilton once we have that formal communication from Hamilton Waterfront Trust with respect to their change in mandate. Again, not making any assumptions as to what that change in mandate is, but if that change in mandate suggests a change as it relates to the role of the trust and its obligations to the city of Hamilton, we would look to KPMG to provide some initial guidance in terms of what the options for the city of Hamilton would be as it relates to those programs or services that the Waterfront Trust currently provides. So with respect to an update, those meetings are scheduled the last week of September, first week of October, and I'll invite the legislative coordinator to speak to the communications that have been sent to Hamilton Waterfront Trust with respect to the financial statements that are before committee today.
So through the chair, Angela from the Clerk's Department, we did receive the audited financial statements in early September. I followed up with an email to them on September 8th saying that we had received them and listing the other requirements as per the revised deed of trust and requesting if they would be in attendance at the September 22nd meeting or if they would be presenting at a later time. I did not receive a response to this email.
Thank you, Angela.
Excuse me. Thank you to Mr. Zagaric, and thank you to Elsie McCrae for that very helpful overview. It is, I'm not an accountant, and I don't play one on TV, but I think it is my responsibility to, I need some assistance professionally in looking at these audited financial statements and the assurance that the money that has been expended is in keeping with the mandate and the priorities, both of this body and that which was handed to the trust. And I don't have the capacity to do that, but I think it is my responsibility to engage in that. So I am frustrated at the protracted nature of this request on behalf of this committee and this council with this body, that it continues to take this long and that emails are unanswered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairperson. Can I ask a question with regards to the financial statements? And maybe that would be to Mr. Zagaric. So when I am reading their financial statements and I see the consolidated statement of operations and changes in the net assets, it shows a waterfront development City of Hamilton management contract, note 7, for $1.4 million. But when I read note 7, it says $15 million. Where was the $15 million accounted for in their financial statements?
So through the chair, we too noted that note in the financial statements, and I'm going to turn to Director McMullen as Director McMullen followed up with the trust as well as with Public Works with respect to the projects that the trust are providing some project management support towards.
Good morning. Through the chair, Brian McMullen, Director of Financial Planning, Administration and Policy and Corporate Services. As Mike indicated, we had followed up with Public Works and the trust regarding the specific note that references $15 million in project revenue that is being managed, in this case by Hamilton Waterfront Trust. So we have a contract, City of Hamilton has a contract with Hamilton Waterfront Trust to project manage a number of projects down on Piers 5, 6, and 7 regarding a redevelopment phase. So in their accounting this year, first time that we've noticed it is that they've suggested that they would put that note in their financial statements, indicating the value of those projects that have been allocated for Hamilton Waterfront Trust to deliver as I'll call them a general contractor.
Okay, so I'm still confused. So $15 million of revenue is cited in note 7. They only show $1.4 million of revenue. I've never been good at math, but that seems to be a significant variance. So why isn't the $15 million being shown as revenue?
So through the chair, what they show in revenue in their actual financial statements is a management fee that they receive for doing those works. The $15 million was an accounting that they chose to report in their statements as being $15 million of projects, consulting work that they have with the City of Hamilton. So it's not true revenue to Hamilton Waterfront Trust. In our case, it's an expense on the city side. We have these contracts where we're expending the work, we're flowing the money through to the Waterfront Trust to pay the contractors. So it's not their true revenue.
So the auditor for the Waterfront Trust agreed to include a note of $15 million on their audit, or the Waterfront Trust insisted on that money being shown here? Because it would lead the average reader to assume that they had received $15 million in revenue, which they did not.
So through the chair, I haven't spoken to either their auditor, BDO, or specifically to the executive director at Hamilton Waterfront Trust, but that's my understanding is that when I read the note, that's what it suggests, that the between the auditors and management, and I guess the trust board as well would have seen that note in these financial statements to show it that way.
So Chair Pearson, our staff are doing their very best to interpret the information that's being provided to us. I remain frustrated and exasperated that we do not have the leadership of the Waterfront Trust, who is making these decisions, here to answer the questions on behalf of the city. So I'm not sure how we push back, but this should not be happening. If the City of Hamilton requests them to appear, then they should be appearing, and they should be answering our questions about their financial documents. Leaving our staff to be the ones who are trying to interpret it and answer the questions is unacceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I don't have the vice chair here today, so if I could just relinquish the chair to you, Councillor Clark, I would just like to make a comment. I thank both you and Councillor Wilson for raising similar concerns that I had. And I'm just wondering if one would like to put a motion on the floor that the trust representative be required to make presentation before the new council as soon as possible. And I do have a question, if I can, to Mr. McMullen then, or to Mike Zagaric. So reading, and that's the same point that I had, reading this item 7, waterfront development, I'm going to assume this money wasn't all paid at once. Am I assuming that this is over a period of time, or this is a lump sum payment? And I certainly agree with Councillor Clark.
Yeah, so through the chair, Brian McMullen again. Yeah, so that money is a commitment that is being made related to these projects, so it would only be flowed as needed.
Okay, so that might be the rationale of why it's been indicated this way, but I agree that the representative should have been here in order to address that. So I'll end now. If someone would like to put a motion on the floor, I won't as chair. I'll leave that in the hands of my colleagues, or then someone to move the rec. Well, it's been moved and seconded as far as received. So Councillor Clark,
to the chair, we do have an existing.
Yeah, I see it. Thanks, Angela. Councillor Powers, thank you.
Thank you. I agree with the comments of both my colleagues. My question is to staff with regards to staffing. My recollections from recent experiences was that the chair of the board stepped down coincidentally before the meeting was to take place, where an appearance was required. The other note was that the manager of operations for them, or the whatever his title was, Mr. Plessold, indicated that he was willing to continue in that capacity until things had evolved to a new direction for the Waterfront Trust. is staff in a position to advise us of those personnel evolutions and whether indeed there is a new, chair of the board and from a staffing component, unless it's an in-camera item because it relates to, personnel and employment. And if so, just tell me so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Through the chair, Mike Zagirik. With respect to the governance, it's my understanding that there currently is a chair of Hamilton Waterfront Trust, a citizen appointed representative is chair of the Hamilton Waterfront Trust. With respect to the executive director and his tenure, I don't have any formal information suggesting the longevity of his position at Hamilton Waterfront Trust, whether Mr. Plessel is retiring in the near future. I believe that was an earlier suggestion, but again, I have no formal information to share with committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have nothing more, but I certainly support the direction you're suggesting that the committee adopt and recommend.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me okay? Because
Yep.
mute unmute thing isn't working right. Okay, thank you. So I don't think it should go unnoticed though that they actually had their net profit go up from a loss of $344,000 to $971,000 profit, which is about $1.2 million turnaround. And then on top of that, they got the COVID grants as were set out in Note 10. So they're actually sitting at $1,433,000 of revenue and over expenses compared to $31,000 last year. And so I think that shouldn't go unnoticed. I'm not sure why Werner Plessel's not here. Maybe he has already retired. I'm trying to follow this with Councillor Farr because he's on the board and is very well versed to it. And we certainly could ask him once this gets to council. But I don't want to let this go unnoticed that they've had a significant turnaround in their financial statements. And, I know they were able to open up again in 2021, which is partially open, same as most other retail businesses do. But I'd be curious to know, maybe Brian, if you could just tell us, is that not a pretty significant turnaround? Because I can't find anything extraordinary in the statements, whether it's revenue or expenses. Any comment on that?
Through the chair, Mike Zagirik, I'll start and then I'll invite Brian if he wishes to expand. With respect to the principal change, you'll note on page 5 in the consolidated statement of operations and changes in net asset, it is the waterfront development management contract with the City of Hamilton that Councillor Clark was referring to. That is the principal change there of approximately $1.3 million contributing to the change in the net assets year-end 2021 versus 2020. And that's what triggered our interest and triggered the conversations Director McMullen had with Public Works staff and Waterfront Trust staff.
But is it not true, Mike, that they are in fact managing those projects? And you're right, as notified under Note 7. And there's even a section, the second one on the revenue, City Hamilton contract and management income. But is that not in our contract that they would manage these projects and that's the revenue from that? Or am I misinterpreting that?
So through the chair, Councillor Ferguson's correct in that there is a contractual relationship. What is not clear in the notes is whether the $1.5 million relates to 2021 activity, 2019, 2020, 2021 activity. That information may be helpful to committee to understand the flow of cash and whether or not that level of funding is sustainable in future years. So again, it was that level of information that we were trying to understand or seek to assess committee today.
Okay, because it did show $166,000 in 2020 in management income, and you're right, it did jump to almost $1.5 million in 2021, and I don't know whether that's COVID related. So I think Councillor Pearson is right. We need them just once again to come. I don't know whether Werner's still there or not, but it'd be nice to get an explanation on this. But if you go to the bottom line, it's certainly, and the auditors agreed with it because they signed off on it, is that it's quite an extravagant, a significant turnaround. But I'd like to I'll move the motion, if you like, Councillor Pearson, we're done that. We ask the management and or the chair or both to appear before the AFNA with the new council.
So you're moving that. I had Councillor Clark go on the speakers list. So can I hold off on that?
Sure.
Councillor Ferguson, I'll come back to you. Councillor Clark, sir.
I'm happy to second Councillor Ferguson's motion at the time. I just have a couple more questions. So the waterfront development City of Hamilton management contract, is that a contract that's tendered where there's competitive bidding on that management?
Through the chair, we would know the details in terms of how that contract was awarded. We would have to get that information and forward it on to committee.
And I guess some of this is my frustration. If it's a tendered contract and they won the contract fairly and squarely, then I would agree with Councillor Ferguson. If this is money that we just handed over to them, which puts them clearly in the black, and our oversight is limited, then I have concerns about that. And to be clear, did we not invite them to appear before AFNA numerous times, several times?
Yeah. Yes.
So is it possible then to modify the motion that, well, let me rephrase that. Are we handing a regular allotment of money to the Waterfront Trust? Or is it only through these management contracts that they receive money from the city?
So through the chair, I apologize, Director McMullen and I are just sharing recollection.
Don't apologize.
There are a series of agreements involving the Waterfront Trust City of Hamilton. There is a outdoor rink management agreement, and that is a formal contract. That was not through a competitive procurement process, but there is a formal contract with terms and conditions, and including financial terms and conditions. In addition to the outdoor rink, there is a management contract with respect to a series of waterfront projects. It's our understanding through Director McMullen's conversations that there is a 10% management fee with respect to the value of those contracts, and that is how that revenue is derived. Again, just not clear from the audited statements whether the reported revenue is specifically for the period of 2021 or whether it goes back to prior years where it may not have been reported and captured in previous financial statements.
So is it possible to withhold payments to the Waterfront Trust until they appear?
Through the chair, that would be something we would have to take away and consult with legal services in terms of our authority to withhold payments.
Thank you. So I would like to move an amendment that we direct staff to explore whether or not the city has the authority to withhold payments until we actually have the Waterfront Trust before us. And speaking to it, I've had enough. We've asked them to appear before this committee numerous times, several times. We would not ever allow any other contractor, any other organization where we've asked them to appear and they just snub us. This is unacceptable. We can't interpret their financial statement without their assistance. We asked them to appear and they didn't. They just sent the document. So I hope I have a seconder for the amendment. If not, we'll just proceed. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to Councillor Ferguson now. Councillor Ferguson, your motion, and I'm just wondering, just to make it clean, would you incorporate what Councillor Clark is asking for and make it one clean motion? Is Councillor Clark okay with that?
I just don't know. I'd like to hear the opinion of legal services first to find out. I don't know whether we have a lawyer with us today, but if you look at the the notes that were discussed earlier, there's $15 million that they're managing. 10% of that happens to be $1.5 million, which is exactly the amount that they're showing as their revenue. And of course, a lot of that is expended through salaries and wages and other expenses that are on the expense side of the income statement. So Yeah, I don't have any trouble seconding or amending my motion to say that we get advice from legal services and report back to a future meeting and whether or not we can take set-offs if they do not appear. If it's just saying, ask them to appear and then get a position from legal services for a future meeting on whether we can take a set-off, I'm okay with that if Councillor Clark is a seconder.
Okay,
That would
Councillor
be-
Wilson, thank you.
That would be perfect from my aspect. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
No problem. Thank you both, because I just want to make it clean for staff. So that motion's on the floor. Councillor Wilson to the motion.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I think it's pretty apparent that I support the intent of the motion, but I just want to make sure I am an understanding of the pre-existing direction that has already been provided by this body. And I know, Mr. Zagaric, I apologize. You did provide a along with Elsie McRae, very helpful chronology. I was of the impression, Chair, that direction, and therein lies the frustration, that direction has been discussed and formally provided previously, but I may be wrong. So if I could get some clarification, if it's okay, through you.
Thank you.
Through the chair, there was previous, and Angela may be able to call up the wording for the previous direction. I'll summarize. The previous direction was to meet with Hamilton Waterfront Trust, and I'm assuming that would be staff to staff, with some understanding as to Hamilton Waterfront Trust boards. Previous messaging to City Council that they are reviewing their mandate. And when they were before committee with respect to business plans and mandate, was they weren't in a position to provide that information as the trust was revisiting their mandate. And so we were expecting to meet, and we are scheduled to meet with the Waterfront Trust later this month, as well as early in October, to understand formally what the Waterfront Trust Board has put forward in order to be able to communicate back to Council with respect to what that requested change in mandate represents and how that requested change in mandate may change the relationship and mandate of the Waterfront Trust as it relates to the City of Hamilton. So again, without having formal knowledge as to what that change is, again, we expect to request that end of September and to have a follow-up conversation in October leading into a report back to Council before the end of the calendar year or early into 2023 with respect to what the Waterfront Trust is proposing, and then being able to identify to City Council at that time what that will represent in terms of the programs and services that the Trust delivers.
So thank you, through the chair, to GM Zagaric. I think what I've heard, so forgive me, is we've been asking, and then we were told to hurry up and wait because the trust is undergoing some internal discussions on their future and their mandate. And until that exercise is completed, their position is that they cannot appear formally to discuss the financial statements that have been provided to date. And I guess I appreciate that it is a staff-to-staff discussion, but I think I'm just trying to understand, again, my role and responsibility. We are responsible for the oversight and to ensure that it is what is being acted and spent is in keeping with a publicly defined mandate. And I don't know why we have to wait for their internal discussions. We wouldn't do that, I don't think, with any other body if we have questions still outstanding on their present and previous activities. So I guess it's my long way of saying I I think Councillor Ferguson's motion is still in order. I just think it's a motion times, to the power of 3 because it seems to be expressed previously. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The motion's on the floor. Councillor Ferguson?
So, sorry to the chair, there is a new speakers
Oh,
list.
sorry. Councillor Powers, sorry. My apologies.
Thank you. I'm very supportive of the blended motion of Councillor Clark and Councillor Ferguson. But I think maybe an add-on, and not to complicate it, is maybe just an add-on to it is further that we confirm the request and direction already provided by City Council to the Waterfront Trust. And then just ties everything back to what we've been saying all along. But that's a suggestion, and I'll go with whatever way is proposed here by the two good councillors.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, questions here to Angela. Angela, did they not eventually appear last year before us? Because somehow we found out that they want to wrap up the Waterfront Trust and probably turn it back to the city, which triggered a resolution asking staff to meet with them and come back with a recommendation. So did they appear before us last year?
Through the chair, I do not believe they did. I would need to look back for sure. I know they did provide correspondence, both in the form of the audited financial statements and then also some extra private and confidential correspondence. But I would have to double check for sure, but I'm not recalling that they actually attended any meetings.
Okay.
That is not what I remember, but to be 100% certain, I would need to go back and look.
Well, I'm sure your memory's far better than mine, but I knew we had some sort of communication with them because we formally heard that they want to wrap it up, and that's why we directed staff to go off and meet with them. And Mr. Zagaric is they're trying to get that arranged to get it done. So I don't want to beat them up too bad right now without knowing all this information. And maybe, quite frankly, I heard it from Councillor Farr, who's on the Waterfront Trust. And we're not even sure whether Werner Plessel's even there anymore. So we need all this information back to us. We got the request to get the legal services to give an opinion on whether we could do set-offs. But I'm anxious to hear back whether, first of all, is Werner Plessel still there? And secondly, who would be the person that could appear and answer these questions? So I'm still supportive of the motion, though, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And before I go to Councillor Clark, I see Councillor Powers, and I was going to say the same. I believe Councillor Farr that presented updates to us earlier this year, if I remember correctly. It was this year. Yes. Councillor Clark.
And if I may, Chairperson, the other thing I believe we talked about was an external review in terms of whether or not it was a going concern. Did we direct that to occur? Mike, do you remember?
Through the chair, while Angela's going back, and I believe it was August, at the August AFNA, there was some direction for an independent external review, and that was why the city has engaged KPMG to be an independent third party that will join us in September and October. I believe in April of this year as well, there was a correspondence from legal counsel from the trust to city council that just suggested of a change in mandate, a brief correspondence. Again, we don't formally have what that represents from the Waterfront Trust, and that was the purpose for our meeting, our initial meeting in September, and then engaging with KPMG with respect to the financial viability of the trust, as well as what options the city may have once we have formal confirmation as to what the Waterfront Trust Board is recommending to the City of Hamilton as it relates to their mandate.
And the reason I asked that, obviously, if you're looking at the financials from 2020 and 2021, and we had a concern in 2020 about the financial viability, if it wasn't for the Waterfront City of Hamilton management contract, we would also have another year where their viability was in question, and the issue of whether or not they are a going concern is still a matter that needs to be resolved. If we didn't provide management contracts, untendered management contracts with no competition, they would find themselves in some serious financial difficulty. And I think we need to have those meetings, most certainly. But I think the councillors still need to hear from the management. So I support Councillor Ferguson's motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, second time.
I apologize. Through the chair to Mr. Zagaric, has the Waterfront Trust Fund ever been included in the work plan of our city auditor, or would that be considered an independent review in terms of the work that is being offered, services offered to you through KPMG? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zagaric.
Through the chair, I see Auditor General Brown here, so I'll invite
Thank you.
Charles maybe to make some comments, and then if necessary, I can speak to the engagement of KPMG.
Thank you.
Through the chair, Charles Brown, City Auditor. Yes, it was, I can't remember if it's on our A list or B list, but we did have Waterfront Trust on our term of council plan. We didn't get to it because of other audits that we had to do. So it will likely survive into the next term of council.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing from Mr. Zagaric in terms of what services KPMG will be providing to you and how that might be different and distinct than the practice normally exercised by our city auditor. Thank you.
Through the chair, the purpose for the engagement with KPMG was to principally examine the financial viability of the trust at its current state, as well as to be an observer of the conversations between the city and Waterfront Trust as it relates to their mandate, and to provide any recommendations to the City of Hamilton as to the path forward the city could pursue with respect to their mandate. So again, not trying to be vague, but without having formal communication from the Waterfront Trust board to their management team as to what the board is recommending in terms of their mandates. I know there was some reference to winding down, but again, just seeking something formal from the board, whether that is the recommendation of the trust. And then we would turn to KPMG and their expertise to provide some advice to the city as to what would be required if that were to be the recommendation of the trust, and what options the city might have with respect to the programs and services that the trust currently delivers.
Thank you. If I could ask through you, Chairperson, to our auditor, Mr. Brown, not to put you in an awkward situation, Mr. Brown, but having heard that overview and the work that would be exercised by KPMG, would you still think it would be necessary to include the trust in your work plan? Because I find your work so helpful in that it offers me insight also into governance and the capacity to understand that procedure and policy are being followed and transparency is being provided. Thank you.
Through the chair, I think the answer is we'd have to see what those conclusions were, what the work was, how they arrived at their conclusions, and perhaps even the terms of reference that they're given. You know, this notion of going concern, for example, would have to be defined, because you can look at it two ways. There's no going concern note in the financial statements as they exist. Mm-hmm. But what does that really mean? I don't think it speaks to the issue that Councillor Clark is interested in. I think he's using it in the sense that, is it a going concern, meaning is it self-sustaining without the support of government funding? And I think that's something that you need to resolve in the terms of reference given to KPMG. It would be very important to have that at the outset of engaging. So that's the kind of information that I'd be, insight that I would be applying to whatever work that they did.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Through the chair then to Mr. Zgierek, are there terms of reference set out for KPMG? Do we know exactly what they're tasked with?
So through the chair, there is a scope of work that we can share with the city auditor. The first stage of that scope of work is to participate in the meetings involving the Waterfront Trust and the City of Hamilton. And again, if the assumption is that the Waterfront Trust Board is recommending to dissolve the trust, is there is language in the revised deed between the City of Hamilton Waterfront Trust as to that process. So we would look for some guidance as to how the City of Hamilton could proceed or what options we have within the guidance within the revised deed. However, if the board makes an alternative recommendation, again, we would report back to council as to what the Waterfront Trust Board's recommendation to council is with respect to their mandate. So again, the first phase would be to understand the recommendation of the trust. If the trust is recommending to continue to have a role in the delivery of programs and services, then we would focus on the financial viability in terms of their financial means to continue that work. However, if the board is recommending to dissolve the Waterfront Trust, then our work would pivot and refocus on within the revised deed how we would go about dissolving the Waterfront Trust and deal with the assets, the contracts, and moving forward. So again, it is subject to formally what the board communicates as it relates to their mandate.
So, Chair, I thought I heard Mr. Zgierek say that he could share those terms of reference with the city auditor. I don't know if that needs to be direction or a formal motion or whether that's an understanding that will be exercised, because I would very much like that.
I'm sure Mr. Zgierek and Mr. Brown will collaborate and provide whatever information. And Mike, you may just confirm that.
Yeah. Through the chair, happy to share it with the city auditor before end of day today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor that is moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Clark. There was an addition that Councillor Powers wanted to add. Did we get that, Angela?
So to the chair, maybe I'll just read the motion out for committee. And also, thanks to Brian's help, we did find that Mr. Plessel did attend committee on April 21st, 2022. So that is in the video online. So the motion is that I have is that Hamilton Waterfront Trust Management and or Chair be requested to attend the new term of council and present the following items for 2021. It's audited and its annual audited financial statements, its strategic and or business plans and any changes thereto, its 10-year capital plan and any changes to its organizational structure, and that finance and legal staff be directed to investigate if the city has the authority to withhold payments to the Hamilton Waterfront Trust until they present the items required in the revised deed of trust and report back to the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee.
Very comprehensive. I see thumbs up. Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Clark, you're okay with that? Councillor Powers, recorded vote then, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you, everyone. Great discussion on that. Item 6 is delegation requests. So we had a delegation request, 6-1 and 6-2, Carl Andrews, Hamilton Community Benefits.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Madam Chair. Does committee wish to receive the audited financial statements as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Powers, that it's be received. Thank you, Madam Clerk, for catching that. You're right.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. Delegation requests now. Carl Andrews, Hamilton Community Benefits Network, respecting 10.5 Government's Review Subcommittee Report 22004 for today's meeting. And 6.2 Tamer Quasim, respecting item 10.5 Governance Review Subcommittee Report 22004 for today's meeting. Mover and a second to approve the delegations. Moved by Councillor Brenda Johnson, second by Councillor Powers. All in favor? Thank you, everyone. We have no,
That vote carries 6-0.
yeah. We have no consent items, no staff presentations today, so we're going to go right into public hearings. We have 9.1 is Nicholas Morris, and I know Nicholas is ready online, respecting an appeal of the city's decision regarding claim number 061628 that was approved September 8, 2022. So Nicholas is with us virtually to address committee respecting the appeal of the city's decision regarding his claim. And welcome, Nicholas, and you have 5 minutes, sir.
Good morning, Chair and Committee. My name is Nicholas Morris. I'm here today seeking the reimbursement of a plumber's bill of $902.87. On the evening of Sunday, April 11th, 2021, our water alarm went off in the basement due to water coming out of the floor drain. Not knowing what to do in this Sunday evening, I called the plumber. The plumber snaked the drain for several hours until tree roots were brought back. The tree in question is a city asset located beside our driveway within the right-of-way. The plumber cleared up the drain and advised us to contact the city. I contacted the city the following morning. I spoke to a clerk and explained the situation and mentioned I had already had a plumber out. The clerk proceeded to explain what was going to happen, and at the end of our conversation, I specifically asked if our bill would be covered, and the clerk replied yes, and to hold on to our bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Nicholas. Councillor Ferguson, sorry.
Yeah, just one quick question to the delegate. Was this an unfinished basement?
Through the chair, the part where the water was coming in was unfinished.
Okay, and how much water collected did it? Was there a puddle or was there a foot of water in that unfinished part before the plumber was able to clear it?
Maybe a little less than a foot.
So the whole floor was covered then?
Yeah, it was right beside our furnace, and it went to the one side of the wall, but didn't proceed into the finished part of the basement.
So was the furnace damaged? Did the water go up into it?
No, there was no damage.
Okay, that's all my questions. I have some questions for staff, but I see others do. So also, thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I'm just seeing, do I have other questions? I'm not sure the speakers list is from the last item.
I believe that
Councillor
Councillor Powers and Councillor Clark have questions for the
Thank you,
delegate.
Councillor Powers.
Thank you for appearing, Mr. Morris. Just help me to clarify. So, the incident in question happened on April the 11th. You engaged a plumber, and did the plumber clear up the problem or not?
Through the chair, the plumber cleared enough to get the water flowing, to get the unclogged, and then that's when he told me to contact the city the next day.
Okay, so your problem was resolved, and the suggestion, rightfully, the suggestion of the plumber is the source was emanating from the city's tree out by the lateral out towards the main, and it was suggested strongly by the plumber that the city should be engaged in order to clear up from their end back to where the problem was in order to ensure that it did not happen in the first. But at the time, it was resolved by the plumber, and therefore your claim was in order to get the 900 and change reimbursed because you cleared, because you personally, at your expense, cleared that lateral. And then any actions the city took afterwards, that was their actions to deal with the problem that the plumber advise you to pass on to the city. Am I generally correct in that interpretation?
Through the chair, correct.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Go on to the next councillor, please.
Councillor Clark, and then I'm going to put myself on the list. And I know Councillor Ferguson has a question for staff. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. So if I may ask a couple of quick questions. So my understanding was that the plumber that you retained went so far into the lateral and then hit tree roots. And then we had the city get involved, and the city came in from the other direction and cleared the blockage completely. Is that what, did I understand that correctly?
Through the chair, correct. They also sent out their own plumber to snake it as well, and their snake got stuck on the tree roots, and then they cameraed it to confirm that it was on city property where the blockage occurred, and then they replaced the old laterals with PVC.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Well, thank you, Councillor Clark, because that was the question I was going to ask. So that's been addressed. Thank you. I have Councillor Johnson. Question to staff, or this is for staff. Councillor Johnson for staff?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so with that then, thank you, Nicholas. And motion to receive Nicholas's information, moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Brenda Johnson. All in favor? Thank you. And now we'll discuss, I have Councillor Johnson on question to staff.
And that
carries
6-0.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. I read this, I read Mr. Morris's complaint with pretty much interest. So my question to the staff is that if what Mr. Morris tells us is accurate, then why would we not reimburse a $900 bill? Because I'm trying to think, if it was a city truck that smashed into Mr. Morris's house, we would be paying for that. So it's a city asset. Why would we not be responsible?
Through the chair, Acting City Solicitor Ron Sabot, perhaps I'll start, and then Dana McLean, Manager of Risk Management Services, may add some information. Firstly, the installation of the lateral is something that property owners do at the time of construction. So the condition of that lateral is considered the responsibility of the homeowner. And it was determined that it was the condition of the lateral that led to the blockage. And the city did do the, to my understanding, through information connected with from Public Works, that we did do the ultimate clearing of the tree roots and replaced the portion of the lateral that was on city property ultimately to effect a permanent solution. But because it was the condition of the lateral in the first place that led to the blockage, that's why the claim was denied.
Thank you. So through you to whoever, who decided it was actually the lateral that was the problem and not the tree root that caused the problem in the lateral? So was the lateral in bad shape because of the tree root? Did somebody actually are able to distinguish that or to determine that?
Through the chair, again, my understanding is that tree roots won't infiltrate a lateral if it is in proper condition. And so it was the condition of the lateral itself that caused the blockage.
Okay, so again, if the tree wasn't there, I don't think anybody can determine whether or not there would have been a problem eventually. But again, if my house is in really poor shape and a city truck rammed into it, you would still be responsible for repairing the house, whether or not it was in good shape or not in good shape. So I'm just struggling with this. I really am. We all have laterals. We all have city trees. And it is a city tree that they were able to unclog it all. So, all right, my last question would be, Was the lateral replaced? Because if it was in such bad shape, was it replaced or just unclogging the tree was enough?
Um, Perhaps I'll turn to Ms. McLean for that detail.
Oh, Ms. McLean?
Through the chair, Dana McLean, Manager of Risk Management Services. Good morning. Um, I'm hoping that we also have Public Works staff available to us with regards to more detail in that regard. But I can indicate to you that at the time the claim was received by the Morrises, we did consult with Public Works staff involved in the sewer lateral maintenance program to determine the situation that had occurred. And it was determined that the tree roots were infiltrating the sewer lateral and the private portion of the lateral. And as Ron has indicated, that tree roots will not infiltrate a properly functioning lateral. Pursuant to the city sewer bylaw, private property owners are responsible for the private portion of the sewer lateral. And if it was functioning, the tree roots would not have infiltrated.
Okay. So I guess my question was, Dana, through you, Chair, was the lateral then since replaced since it was in such horrible condition? Or is it been, the tree was removed, the tree root was removed and all is well again? So that tells me that if it's all well again, then the lateral wasn't really the problem, if it's still working.
Through the chair, it's my understanding that the public portion of the sewer lateral was replaced. I will need to confirm with Public Works staff under that maintenance program whether or not the private portion was replaced. Through the sewer lateral management maintenance program, the city does offer through that program compensation to private property owners to assist in the replacement for a permanent solution to the private portion. However, it is unclear to me at this time whether or not that did occur at the time.
So, and thanks, Dana. So, Chair, it's too bad that we've received Mr. Morris's presentation, because then my question back to Mr. Morris was your portion of the lateral replaced, or was it in fine condition and it was just the public portion that was? We're talking $900, and quite frankly, Mr. Morris, you're very fortunate that it wasn't worse as far as flooding is concerned. I've been through it. It is not a fun time. So those are my questions for staff. Thank you.
To the chair, Public Works staff is in attendance in council chambers if there are any questions.
Okay, so we'll see if the next councillor asks. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chairman. And of course, at the end of the day, what caused the problem was the city's tree. And what will happen is the roots will follow along the pipe and to get to a joint where they can work their way in, and then they go both directions. They go up to the house and they go out to the main as they're looking for water. That's just nature, the way it works. I understand from the letter that was sent in that there was an emergency, and quite frankly, on Sunday night, and my family's at risk, and there's a foot of water in my basement, I'd be calling the plumber too. And so he come out with his grinding machine. It would probably cut about a 1 inch hole through the root and get the water running, but it had to have a permanent fix, which Public Works come back and did. But whether the root decided to go towards the house or towards the main is irrelevant. It was still our tree. And so I'm having trouble understanding why we're being so heavy-handed on this when it was caused by our tree, and it would still be working fine today. From the letter that I read here, they replaced it with PVC pipe, which is it does provide better joints than concrete pipe, and it would help prevent the root from getting in there again. So I'm very sympathetic to the homeowner. I think he did the right thing in an emergency Sunday night to call a plumber and get him in there and at least get the water running, because it wouldn't be a very pleasant experience having your unfinished part of your basement have a foot of water in it. It's probably some washing machines ran in that period, or toilets flushed and so on, and to have that back on your house floor would not be a pleasant experience. I'm fully sympathetic why he did that, and I think we should be compensating him for that emergency repair until the city was able to get their forces in and do the permanent repair. So that's my comments. I don't have any particular questions because I think they're answered all in the letter. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. Councillor, sorry. Councillor Clark, sorry.
Thank you. I couldn't say it any better than what Councillor Ferguson did at the appropriate time. I'm going to move reimbursement of the residents' costs. You know, I find it frustrating that from time to time we get these situations where there's pushback because a city tree has infiltrated a pipe. And then in other occasions, there's no issue. It's just an automatic and the city repairs it. In this case, the resident acted, I think, prudently. You have a foot of water in your basement, it's doing damage. And there's nothing worse than the smell of that water in your house. So he acted quickly to resolve the problem so that it didn't get any worse. And I think it was prudent. And given that we have a compassionate grant program available for such situations with the pipes, then we should be utilizing it and reimbursing his costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. I'll come back to you, Councillor Clark.
I was going to do the same thing, so I would certainly support Councillor Clark's motion at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Second it, Councillor Powers. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the appropriate staff who are available. There is a staff supporting documentation and for public understanding, including my own, if I could ask the staff to review the SLM program and what is the responsibility of the city when it comes to these sorts of things. Thank you. And what that policy says.
Thank you. Staff, who I'm not sure who's in attendance.
Good morning, and through you, Madam Chair. Shane McCauley, Acting Director of Water and Wastewater Operations. You're correct. We have the sewer lateral management program that's been well established to deal with these sort of situations. I am sympathetic to having sewer backup in the middle of the night in your home and what to do with that. Our program, though, is well established. It does provide opportunity for homeowners to utilize a city contractor to come out and do the inspection and restoration of service, or it allows for them to select their private contractor to do so, so long as they meet the requirements of the program and submit the supporting videos, the sketch, the documentation that go along with that. And that would be reimbursed under the program. In this particular case, Mr. Morris had contacted his private plumber. They were unable to restore service. They were able to clear it enough to get the water to drain, but subsequently they called the city several days later for us to come out under the sewer lateral management program to have our contractor inspect the sewer lateral to do the clearing. Our contractor did notice that the lateral was plugged with tree roots. They were only able to get so far. They were able to clear it enough to restore service. And subsequently, we did replace the public portion of the sewer lateral. My understanding from Mr. Morris's note is that the private portion was already PVC pipe. And so that didn't need to be replaced in this case. So if it had, they would have opportunity to take advantage of the $1,500 to replace that portion. But as it is, the city did replace the public portion of that lateral. Unfortunately, the sewer lateral management program allows for one of those avenues, either the private plumber or the city contractor to be reimbursed. And in this case, the city contractor did go out, they did their inspection, they were able to complete the work, and it was funded under that program. So the homeowner was not charged for the clearing of the tree roots under the city's sewer lateral management program. However, we did not receive sufficient documentation under the private contractor, and the program isn't set up to reimburse under both scenarios. It's one or the other.
Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. When you state to staff, well established, how long has this policy been in practice. Thank you.
Through Madam Chair, the sewer lateral management program as it sits today was originally established back in 2005.
Okay. And thank you. When you state you did not receive sufficient documentation, that documentation that is set out publicly is also set out in the program and the public information, what is required?
Through Madam Chair, yes, it's clear on our city's website. We require a closed circuit television video or CCTV video, surface markings indicating where the blockage is, as well as a sketch illustrating and describing the condition of the lateral. We received no documentation outside of the request to pay for the plumber's invoice. Our contractor provided all of that information under this sewer lateral management program.
Thank you. One final question, if I may. The timing of this, the delegate described it, I believe, on a Sunday evening. I'm sure that's not the first time that this has happened. Is the program accessible on weekends, or how does that work? Thank you.
Through Madam Chair, yes, they would call this city's number, 546 city, and we would have a contractor on call 24/7, so they would be able to take advantage of it.
Thank you. Appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. With that now, I'm going to go back to, is it Councillor Clark and Councillor Powers on the motion? And the motion, if you just repeat it, please.
Yes, the motion is to reimburse the resident for his costs on the flooding in the basement. And very quickly, I listened very carefully to Councillor Ferguson's comments and our Public Works comments. So the private lateral was PVC. It was a city tree that infiltrated the pipe, the city's pipe. The city cleared it and then replaced the pipe. And so the entire thing is now PVC.
Through you, Madam Chair, the entire pipe is PVC. Under our bylaw, the entire lateral is the responsibility and ownership of the homeowner. So understanding is that existing public portion of the lateral was there prior to the development of the property, at which time they could have chose to replace the entire lateral with PVC. However, whoever built that home decided to only go to property line with PVC as opposed to replacing the entire lateral.
Thank you, but it was a city tree that caused the issue.
That is correct.
Thank you. My motion stands if Councillor Powers still wishes to second. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's on the floor, that the homeowner be reimbursed. And all in favor?
Excuse me, don't mean to put a fly in the ointment. Is there a dollar value in the reimbursement, or is it open-ended?
I think the homeowner stated $902.70. Can you clarify if staff have that?
So I'm just asking Councillor Clark if he wants to just reiterate what it is.
I'm happy to include it. My assumption was that was the maximum because that's what the fee was that he paid. Thank you.
So through the chair, I'm just adding that in so that you will see it now in the vote. I've put the vote back up.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that vote carries 5-1.
Thank you. And we're going to move on now to 9-1 is staff supporting documentation. Oh, sorry. We're past that. We're on
if we could just receive that documentation.
Yeah. Okay, motion to receive the documentation from staff and Nicholas Morris. Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Ferguson. All in favor?
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. 9.2, Carl Andrus, Hamilton Community Benefits Network is here with regards to 10.5 Governance Review Subcommittee. Carl, if you're here, you have 5 minutes.
Carl's with us. He's just coming down to the podium.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, councillors, and staff members. I'm here to talk about, very quickly about delegations, something very near and dear to my heart, something I do quite a fair bit before you guys, and something that our organization, the Hamilton Community Benefits Network, is proud to help train residents to do for themselves. So I want to talk a little bit about the order of business and delegation and ask that this committee consider moving resident delegations to the top of the agenda before staff presentations, out of respect for residents that take time out of their busy days to come before you to present to you their opinions and their feelings on matters that may be before you. And I ask that you put them before staff delegations, not only to respect the residents' time, but because I think that having them there shows ultimately that you want to hear first from the people who elect you on the important issues that matter to them, and to respect them for taking time out of their busy days to come speak before you. As you may have noted, I've been here about an hour and 15 minutes to wait to present before you on a very light agenda with very few items before you today. Now, of course, I'm a salaried not-for-profit employee, so I don't mind sitting around waiting like staff members. However, regular residents aren't, and I think it's only incumbent on you to respect their time and to just note that by making a small change to the order of business. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Andrus. Questions of committee? Councillor Clark, and then Councillor Johnson first.
Yep, thank you very much. Thanks for coming today, Carl. Always appreciate your presentations. So, Carl, being on the planning committee, I've always found it helpful, even as a private citizen, to hear what the staff have to say first, in the event that maybe my questions or my comments might change. So, and I too appreciate that, you know, if there's staff presentations to be done, but they're not related to the delegates, absolutely, let's put the delegates ahead. But do you agree that if there is something on topic, that maybe we should wait until after all the presentations are done, so that when we hear from the delegates, then it all starts to make sense, and the delegates can pinpoint certain things that people can follow the bouncing ball better? I don't know if I'm expressing myself enough or properly.
Yes, so respectfully through the chair, I believe that particular item that you're referring to isn't what I'm asking today. That would actually be in public hearing that you're referring to, but what I'm asking for, and the reason why I suggest that delegates go first before staff presentations on matters before you, is the fact that the staff presentation itself was already available online before the person comes out to delegate. And more often than not, residents that are coming out to delegate and residents that we train aren't subject matter experts. Making them sit through long staff presentations and long questioning isn't going to change the reasons why they've come out. They've come out to share with you personal feelings, to share their opinions on their life experiences and how that might affect the decisions before you. A complex technical staff decision or complex staff presentation isn't going to change the reasons that they came out to delegate, because they want to talk. And what we often hear from delegates is they're not experts. They don't know exactly what to speak about. So we encourage them to come and talk about their emotions, how the issue before you relates to them on a personal level. Because unlike some delegates like myself, they're not going to be subject matter experts. And I don't think it will change or make any difference in terms of their delegations, because they've come out to speak from their heart, not from a technical sense, to have to sit through staff presentations and then counter questions. Thank you.
You know what, Carl, that's very insightful. And I don't mean in respect of a public hearing, and you're absolutely right. That's what it's treated as at the planning committee. But say, for instance, and I've noticed this, that when we heard, say, for instance, the LRT, and it was a long meeting, and I totally understand that people ended up having to leave because they couldn't stay very long. But hearing all the information first and then hearing from the delegates, as someone who's receiving all this, to me, it's a little bit more, it's more effective for me. But then and it's not to argue with what you're saying, because I totally understand people were leaving because it was just lasting too long. But as somebody receiving the presentation and then receiving delegates, I could follow the bouncing ball better and understand what it is that they were most concerned about, because I heard the information, I read the report, heard the information, but I'll just leave it at that. I totally understand that. I really think maybe there's some wiggle room for us to take a look at the agenda and say, these delegates need to go first. This is not going to, the presentation should not have any bearing on their delegation. And so, yeah, absolutely. Whenever we have the opportunity, we should be putting delegates first. Like today would have been a perfect example. You should have been going first. So that was just my 2 cents worth. But thanks again, Carl, for coming in. It's always wonderful to hear your point of view.
Thank you. And through the chair, just one final comment to that, specifically around the timing. So when delegates know that they are going to be able to speak first based on the agenda, they know that they can show up at a set time to come and delegate and not have to wait. And I think that showing that extra respect in terms of how you frame the presentations is very important. And the other thing I want to highlight for you as well is that hearing delegates first gives you an opportunity to ask staff questions that may have been raised by delegates in the order of business. So thank you.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks again, Carl. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Erin. Before I see more on the speakers list, but Madam Clerk, I just want to question, because what Carl's raising is very valid, but that's not on the report today. Am I correct?
So to the chair, within the governance review subcommittee report, there is a review of the procedural bylaw. So any changes that would be being made to the procedural bylaw would be warranted today.
I thought it was specific to the selection. Okay, that's fine. Just wanted to be sure. Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's a number of things that is in the governance report that's before us, specific to Mr. Andrews' presentation. So what I think I'm hearing is that the publication of the staff reports well in advance of the meeting informs the delegate. They then come to the meeting to share their view and their lived experience as might be impacted by that staff report, which they have so informed themselves.
Yeah, through the chair, yes.
And I think you delineated in your comments, specific in reference to Councillor Johnson's questions, that a public hearing format is slightly different under the Planning Act, and that residents would understand that. But for all intents and purposes, all other times, we should be moving the delegates to the front of the meeting, and ideally what you would like to see is that be incorporated in our procedural bylaws so that when the agendas are drafted, delegates are up front.
I believe through the chair that would be the best and most respectful way to do it, based on both my personal opinion as a delegate and my professional opinion as someone who does delegate training.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. Thank you for appearing today.
Thank you. Councillor Powers.
My thoughts are somewhat contrary, is recalling the discussions in governance a number of years ago in order to establish the way that the agendas operate. I think Mr. Andrus' comments are valid, but my recollection is when we engage the public in discussions of how things happen, their preference was if they were delegating on an item before the relevant committee, their preference was to wait to hear the staff presentation, to hear the information, and maybe in some cases that information answered the questions they had and they had no reason to delegate. Conversely, the information that was provided in the staff presentation aided them and in making their delegation and raising, pertinent questions to it. So I think going back to what Councillor Johnson has said is that It merits consideration by the governance committee. There may be a way to entertain the public delegations if they are not relevant to an item on the agenda that's for the consideration of the particular committee. So I certainly appreciate his presentation and believe it has merits in discussions at the governance committee going forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you very much. Perhaps my comments will be more appropriate when we get to the governance subcommittee, but I had the privilege of speaking to Mr. Andros following the last governance subcommittee, just to delve a little bit more into some of his comments. And what I've heard from him today, I think underscores values that we have to lean into and deliver on. I think Mr. Andros, I'll ask him the question then. I believe, Mr. Andros, you have said that it is advantageous for residents and citizens to know in advance the predictability of the agenda, that always that public delegations will be heard first so that they can manage their private time. And if they're taking time off work or having to find a care person for their children, that best serves their needs rather than having each agenda possibly changed to accommodate delegates each time. Thank you.
Thank you through the chair, Councillor Wilson. Yes, I believe that's very strong. And I just want to also address the idea that a staff presentation is going to fundamentally change. In the hundreds of delegates that I've trained in the last 5 years, along with other community organizations, we teach them first to open the agenda, to read the staff reports, and then to speak from their heart to the issues before you. And unless staff are dramatically presenting different information than they're putting in the staff reports, and in the agendas, which I don't think they do, at least in my experience, I don't see the value in making them wait through the staff presentation and then through all of council's questions, rather than, as you present, to let them have a predictable agenda in which they can schedule their time, and as you mentioned, their childcare, perhaps take hours off work, especially with virtual delegations instead of a day. I just think it's much more respectful and much more in keeping with open governance practices. Thank you.
Councillor?
Yes, thank you. Rather than doing it ad hocly at each meeting and not providing that predictability so that they can manage their time. Thank you. My other question, well, you've just touched upon it, is that overwhelmingly, it's been my experience in the last 4 years that those residents who have come to delegate, they're carving out that time in their work life, their personal time, and they have done their homework. And they're sharing their views through their lived experience. And it helps me when it comes to that staff presentation because their views and their values are now implanted. And I'm hearing the staff presentation through that lens that they have shared with me. And it helps assist me in forming their questions. Has it been your sense, Mr. Andros, that delegates, when they appear, have overwhelmingly, you're training them, and I think you just said that they have done their homework. They because it's a very nerve-wracking thing. And it's been my experience that residents actually sometimes are better prepared than the rest of us because they are coming to a public podium and the practice is not there for them. Can you share any insight into the amount of work that these folks do? Because you have trained them. Thank you.
I'm happy to, through the chair, Councillor Wilson. I will say that anyone who's taking the time out of them, as you alluded to, it's especially first-time delegates. It is a daunting task. People who are not used to public speaking, people who are perhaps just regular residents who have heard about an issue that's before you that they're passionate about and want to share with you their feelings and their knowledge and their lived experience on that issue. It's a daunting task for them, especially to come forward the first time, which is why I really believe that it's very respectful of you to kind of prioritize that. And so by doing that, I think that you give an opportunity to make a more welcoming environment to say to the residents, this is when this is going to happen. You've built up your courage to be here. You don't have to lose your nerve after sitting through a 3-hour meeting and maybe you run away because you bundled up your courage to come and before these powerful figures that are the city councillors and the mayor and to speak your heart. And then I think it's just incumbent on you as elected leaders to prioritize that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrus. Appreciate your delegation.
Sorry,
I believe that's, I believe Councillor Wilson is finished and were you wanting to?
sorry, my apologies.
Sorry.
My apologies on that. Thank you. Okay, Councillor, so myself then again, I'll relinquish the chair to Councillor Clark. So Carl, I want to thank you for your presentation today and certainly the insight, and certainly can't disagree. I think we've gone, as Councillor Powers touched on, we've gone around this track in the past, and I'm sure we should be doing it again. I think there can be amicable sort of solution in certainly I'm suggesting that this be referred to the governance committee, but I could see as the concerns for citizens who have time constraints, if they make that known at the beginning of a meeting, especially as was mentioned about with Councillor Johnson, the LRT meeting being very, very long. If residents want to delegate at the beginning, that we can have those delegates at the beginning, and then we could also hold the delegates that wish to delegate afterwards, recognizing that they'd only have one opportunity to delegate, though, but that could be something that governance committee could look at. So you could have a split between delegations all being all at once, or some that may want to wait to hear the staff presentation and do their delegation after. That's just a suggestion, but that I'm sure if there's a motion to direct this to governance committee, it can be evaluated further. Thank you, everyone. Councillor Power or Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I'd move this request be referred to the governance committee for their consideration and recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Powers. Thank you. Thank you, Carl. And that's on the floor then. No.
Before I open the vote, I believe Councillor Wilson has a comment on that. Councillor Wilson?
I'm sorry, Councillor Wilson. I flipped over to vote and didn't see that. Sorry.
No, not a problem. Thank you. I guess my challenge with the motion is that this was deliberated at governance committee, and we have heard this request several times, and I think that this body has an opportunity when we get to governance committee to deal with it, and in so doing, to make the change, if they want, to the procedural bylaw, which will enable, at the new start of council, to put out that predictable, respectful opportunity that will guide public delegates. And I don't know how many times this has to be deliberated again by this body. So I normally don't express myself this way in terms of something being deferred, but we've heard this request many times, and I think when we get to the governance committee, we can make a decision perhaps today. Thank you.
So to the chair, the clerk would like to speak to Councillor Wilson's comment.
Okay.
Through the chair, the decision is before AFNA today to make the decision on the order of the on the order of agendas. The decision was deliberated in governance. They approved the changes to the procedural bylaw. So now that is in front of AFNA today. I don't necessarily support it being sent back to governance again to be deliberated. It was already deliberated there, and now it's in AFNA, and it's whether AFNA supports the recommendation that was decided at governance. So it's really up to this body from a governance perspective to decide whether they support the recommendations within the report from governance or whether you wish to amend them. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Sorry, through you, Chair, I very much appreciate that clarity brought by Clerk Holland. So I won't be supporting the motion. And when we get to the governance subcommittee report, I will be speaking to that matter then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Yes, so I'm wanting to clarify when I'm reading, I forget the appendix number, Madam Clerk, I'm sorry. That is in for the governance report. Can you refer me to the page where there was the recommendation with regards to the agenda order?
Through the chair, I'm going to have Janet walk you through the changes and regarding delegation and the order of business.
Well, perhaps what we can just do, Chair, to not waste any time is to refer the referral motion to the section of today's agenda, which I believe was 10.5, and then we can have that discussion then, and if the committee chooses to send it back to governance, that would be the appropriate time in the meeting to do it, would it not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Powers. Sorry, Councillor Powers.
I thought I waved it off. I'm supportive of the direction suggested by Councillor Clark, and that we deal with it when we deal with it.
Okay. So we'll hold off then. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, just as people are speaking, I was flipping through the changes to the policy as recommended by the governance committee. I don't see anything highlighted that a decision was made on the delegation status. Janet, can you direct me to that? I'm on the corporate human resources policy, and there's lots of stuff here about, the police services board. There's lots of things here about the vaccination, particularly for members of council, but I can't find anything yet. Maybe I've missed it, where they deliberated and made a recommendation related to delegations.
I believe it's page 14 of 17, Appendix A, correct, Janice? Item 1.
Angela, is that the new appendix to that report? Because I've got Appendix B to report FCS 22075. Sorry.
Which appendix?
Angela? Was it A?
I'm pulling it up, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
For Appendix A is the verification policy. So my guess is it's Appendix B, but
it is Appendix B to my report. But as far as
report,
okay,
but I believe, yeah, it's Appendix B.
Okay.
I don't see an Appendix B. I see an Appendix A, but I don't see an Appendix B.
But you have to scan down. It's page 14 of 17 if you keep scanning down, and that becomes...
In Appendix A?
Yes, and it becomes B.
Okay. And where it is, what you have is the amendments to the procedural bylaw, the actual bylaw that will be put in place as for the amendments. And it's section 5.11, order of business.
Yeah.
Okay, what we've done is the staff presentations have been moved up on the agenda under delegation requests, with the delegations being separated out from the public hearings / delegations like they are now, and moved up under staff presentations so that the delegations can be heard immediately following the staff presentations. As we understand, Council has always wanted to hear the staff presentations prior to the delegations. That's why we made that change, and we realized that delegations were waiting a significantly amount of time, so we've moved them up on the agenda.
Okay, I appreciate that because I was looking for highlights for the changes, and there's highlights in Appendix A, but closer to the top. I'm in Appendix now. I see order of business. So the recommendation from the, from the committee, but it's not bolded to us that this is a change. I understand it now where delegation requests come in right after communications.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
That was hard to find. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so do we have, thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, just because I've been trying to follow the conversation here. So delegation request was put in after communications, which I thought it always was anyway. And then we have staff presentations, and then we have delegations after staff presentations. That's how it's presented in 5.1, page 14 of 17 of Appendix B, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
So Mr. Andrus is asking us to take G, staff presentations, and put it below H. So take H and G and flip them so that the delegations come before staff presentations.
And we've always understood that council wanted to hear the staff presentations prior to the delegations. So that's why it was listed in the manner that it's listed. However, council can make that change if they so wish.
You know what? I'm of the opinion, as well as everybody else, is that we do make the change, take it to council, and let council as a whole decide. And we first have to make the change first, but highlight it so that it's point of discussion. It's not buried in Appendix B, page 14 of 17, that it actually is, everybody is on the same page. No pun intended. Okay, thank you. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, so with that, so the report stands and is what's before us that goes to council. That's my understanding.
With all due respect, I don't think we have the report in front of us yet. We're not at 10.3. So when we get there,
that's right.
I would.
Yep, we will. You're right.
To make that sure.
Certainly. Okay, thank you, everybody. So now I need to have a motion to receive Carl Andrus's presentation. Moved by Councillor Wilson, second by Councillor Powers. Thank you.
So through the chair, we didn't vote on the referral because we will be dealing with it later anyway. Councillor Clark, are you just going to pull that? Sorry, Councillor Ferguson, are you just going to pull that right now and we'll receive the delegation and then deal with 10.5 when we get there?
Can't hear you, Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I'll agree to defer until we get to
Okay.
The governance review at 10.5.
Thank you. So vote on receiving Carl Andrus' presentation. Thank you.
And that vote carries 6-0.
We have Tamir Qasim in attendance, respecting item 10.5, Governance Review Subcommittee for today's meeting. Tamir, are you there?
I am. Morning.
Okay. Good morning, sir. And you also have 5 minutes.
Okay, I will be quick. So good morning, everyone. My name is Tamer. I am the current chair of the Committee Against Racism, CAR for short. As a as a reminder, we are an advisory committee to the Hamilton City Council, and our mandate is to report to City Council on issues and concerns pertaining to racism and provide advice to address the impacts of racism through the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee. Today, I would like to very briefly speak to the committee about item 2 on the governance subcommittee report 22-004. All I want to say is that CAR supports the recommendations brought forward to the AFNA committee. The changes recommended are an important step in allowing the city to continue to build bridges with the community. Additionally, the roles assigned to various city advisory committees allows them to remain involved in the process and support the city through the process. And the process I'm referring to is through the setting up of the new selection committees and the new reorganization of the bylaws. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Tamir, thank you for that. I don't see questions, so if I can have a mover to receive the presentation, moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Clark. All in favor? Thank you, everyone.
That vote carries 6-0.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. I'm in the roadmap, we're item 10. I'm just trying to find that on the agenda. Sorry, this is Hamilton Future Fund Audit Management Action Plans. Charles Brown, AUD 21013A, Citywide Auditor Charles Brown can give an overview. May I have a mover and a second to put it on the floor? Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Powers. And Auditor General, did you wish to give does anybody wish an overview, or are we okay with the report? We're okay with the report. Councillor Clark, did you have a question? So it's been moved and seconded to approve this then?
No, I have the Auditor General here in the chambers, and I think he would like to say a few words, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to be sure. Auditor General Charles Brown, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Charles Brown, City Auditor. I just thought I'd give a recap of what the audit findings were prior to you receiving the action plan, just so that you can have some insight and be better informed. The objective of our audit was to assess the effectiveness of the Hamilton Future Fund's governance and oversight, the processes that are used to manage grants and loans, the financial reporting and performance measures. Some background, you probably already know this, but it's worth a reminder that in its original conception, the Hamilton Future Fund had a Fund A and a Fund B. 100 million was in Fund A and 37 million was in Fund B. And the idea was that Fund A would be a legacy fund, which was meant to be kept intact so that investment yield income would be made available for use in grants. And I think the intention was that that yield over the course of 5 or 6 years, let's say, given the typical yields at the time, could be used to replenish the dissipating Fund B. The 37 million in Fund B would be obviously gradually drawn down with having grants given out, and then that would be replenished through the investment income of Fund A. So the major themes that we commented on in the Future Fund audit, the need for an overall strategy as to the use and nature of fund investment. We're suggesting that it's an opportune time to visit what the fund is meant to achieve and how it could be aligned with city priorities. As it stood at the end of 2019, which was the most recent financial report that we had available to us, the Fund A was 49 million, not including internal loans of some 40 million that existed. That repayments of those loans and investment income would replenish the Fund A to reach 100 million by 2028. The other observation that we made was that Fund B Its balance at 2019 was 1.8 million, and there needs to be a decision made about whether to replenish Fund B, because it's likely in the next cycle or two that fund will dissipate. The other commentary or theme that we had was the need for a more stable support for the fund by appointment of a fund administrator, and the need to clarify roles and responsibilities of various support functions. We also commented on the need to ensure community consultation occurs for input on future use of the fund, and to improve the administration of grants and the reporting of performance. So in detail, there are some of the things that we recommended: a comprehensive plan, for example, that would outline how the city would use the reserve funds going forward. The installation of formal guidelines for grants in some areas that we perceive needed improvements, such as scoring, stepping up compliance and monitoring efforts on the planned and actual expenditures and outcomes. With respect to the performance outcomes, we found that they needed to be more formally tracked and reported, and in particular, stepping up the monitoring on the requirement to return unused funds and essentially reviewing progress on a more timely basis. So we made 10 recommendations that included the development of a strategy for use of the funds that incorporates public consultation, formalizing roles within the city administration to more adequately support the future fund, making various improvements that are outlined in the report to grant processes, and improving specifically the monitoring of performance through strengthening outcome measures that can be used to explain to the public the various outcomes and benefits that have accrued through those grants. So that's essentially my recap. I guess I would turn that over to Mike or Brian.
So through the chair, I'll start, and again, I'll invite Brian if he has any further comments. Again, as I've stated before, we do welcome the Auditor General's recommendations. Staff do support all the recommendations. What you do see before you with respect to the management action plan, and committee may recall, staff brought forward a report on the consultation process in May of this year, suggesting a consultation process with the community that was then further amended to direct staff to engage with the Future Fund Board, which we did last week, and that was reported to General Issues Committee yesterday. And then we will proceed to, again, engage with the community. Subject to the feedback that we received with respect to the community surrounding the principles around permanence or sustainability versus using these funds to deal with city needs surrounding, for instance, assets or housing as examples. I believe there were 4 city priorities or needs that were identified in the May report. We would then report back to council in terms of the outcome of the consultation process, seek direction from council with respect to the direction council wishes to proceed with respect to Future Fund A and B, and subject to that direction, then proceed with recommendations 5 through 9 surrounding the administration and intake and reporting, if that were to be the direction of council, is continuing with a granting program. So again, through the chair, staff are supportive of all recommendations, and we are taking a phased approach, the first phase being the consultation process and seeking direction from council with respect to the future of funds A and B.
Okay. Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask Charles, sorry, I have Councillor Wilson on the speakers list first, so I'll go to Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just again, another outstanding report that has been before us before from the auditor. And every time I read it and hear about it on the substantive direction and findings, I'm asking another question. Just so I'm clear, if I could, through you, Chair, the part and the action that will be coming from management on unused funds, could you just elaborate on that, please, the auditor, that there were instances where there was unused funds and there was no formal mechanism to see their automatic return? Thank you.
Through the chair, that's correct. We found no formal mechanism, but more to the point, something that would be timely.
Mm-hmm.
We're not suggesting money wasn't returned or that. It's just that it's not being returned on a timely basis. So you're losing the opportunity, obviously, of investing that and earning income. So,
thank you. Through the chair, to the auditor, your recommendations with respect to criteria used by the fund and the monitoring of performance. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit in terms of the practice at present and your recommendation? Thank you.
so through the chair, yeah, there were definitely some positives that we mentioned in the report. Mm-hmm. Around the grants process. It certainly is an example of transparency, mm-hmm. Where grant applications are discussed. Where we focused our attention and suggest it needs improvements is just the formality, like the scoring mechanisms and the criteria be explicitly set out and established and followed, and that kind of informality would, our presumption is, would make it more fair and transparent in terms of the actual result and the decision making behind it.
Thank you. Through the chair, if I could ask just on that, is there a scoring mechanism available and submitted into the public record presently?
No, we did not find an actual score that was done for each application.
Okay. Thank you again, Auditor Brown. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, and thank you, Charles, for the report. So, was there ever any discussion about the Community Enrichment Fund and the Future Fund? The Community Enrichment Fund has a very strict criteria that each application is adjudicated, each application is scored, and they are given money based on the score, and there's follow-up. There isn't one application that doesn't come forward the next year that isn't scrutinized to make sure that they've done what they said they were going to do, that the money is returned promptly if they don't do it. So I'm just wondering, I'm hearing the same rhetoric that goes around with the CEF, except we're treating it as two hugely separate entities that the city does. So, Charles, to simplify things, and maybe I'm too simple, is why are we not putting them under one umbrella, although we could still treat them differently as far as Future Fund comes from this account and CEF comes from this account, but still have the same strict criteria, adjudication, the scoring, and the following up? Why are we not just mimicking what we've already got instead of reinventing the wheel?
Through the chair, that was our thought process. We actually used the Enrichment Fund as kind of the benchmark for what we were looking for and found wanting insofar as the Hamilton Future Fund, which is a significantly larger fund.
Yes.
And so the natural question is, how come we have all of these strict processes and procedures for the enrichment fund, but we don't have an equivalency with respect to how we manage and administer the future fund. So that became obvious to us. You know, the question of whether you just roll them together under one administration, that's down in the weeds. We just think they should have whatever the solution is. I'm not saying we prefer one or the other, keep them separate or join them together. That's for council to decide. But certainly we recommend having an equivalent strictness and formality in the administration of the future fund. And it's one of the reasons that we looked at the future fund, because we had already audited, I think I wasn't here, but my staff made available to me the audit that we had done previously on the enrichment fund. And so it accordingly had the formalities and the processes that we saw were necessary in administering the future fund.
Good. To me, it sounds like you're singing the same tune I am. I believe that the future fund, a big chunk of that money actually came from the former sale of the Stony Creek Hydro. And there was, I think, $60 million involved at that point. And that's why I've always kept a keen interest of what was going on that side of the wall, which I think there shouldn't be. I think it should be all in the same room. But anyways, thank you very much, Charles. I would really like to encourage the staff, if they're going out to the public, to use the CEF as a measuring tool, and even put the question to people, should it be under one umbrella rather than two separate entities? Thoughts, Mr. Brown?
Through the chair, Mike Zagarek, maybe I'll answer that one. Through the chair, the Community Enrichment Fund was one of the 4 priorities that Council approved in May. If the feedback from the community and if the direction of Council were to deviate from the practice of the 2 funds, Future Fund A and B, and to leverage the principal in Future Fund A towards a granting program, that was one of the options that staff presented to Council and Council supported with respect to the engagement process, and we would report back through the engagement process as to the feedback from the community.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate the input. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
No, thank you, Chair. I asked my questions. Thank you.
Sorry, with that, going back then, can we have an electronic, it's been moved and seconded, electronic vote to approve the recommendations?
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. We're going on to, thank you, 10-2. 2021 Reserve Report FCS 22065 citywide. May I have a mover and it's Brian McMullen as staff. Mover and second to put the report on the floor. Moved by Councillor Johnson, second by Councillor Ferguson. Any questions or comments on this? Seeing none. Okay, sorry. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question on the report. I'm on page 8 of 11 of the report. It's a nice bar chart which clearly lays out the history and the forecast for our total reserves. And you can see between 2020 and 2021 and 2022, there's a drop of $165 million in our reserves, despite the fact we had a significant surplus at 21 and year end, and most of that went to reserve funds, whether it's the COVID reserve or the tax stabilization reserve and so on. Those are the 2 big ones. But we've had some extraordinary expenses that have occurred in 2022, and one being the Red Hill Judicial Review, which is forecasted now to be $28 million, and the Shit Oaks Creek cleanup. Both of those were funded from reserves. And of course, we have more potential liability with Shit Oak Creek before we finish with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. So my question to either Mike or Brian is that $166 million reduction from 1,230,000 to 1,064,000. Has the 28 million already been taken out for the judicial review and also the Shadow cleanup?
Through the chair, I'll start with the tax stabilization reserve and the judicial review, and maybe give Brian some time to look up the Shadow cleanup. The tax stabilization forecast that's in the report before you does reflect council's approved funding of the inquiry. So to the councilor's question, yes, those commitments are reflected in those future year forecasts. And with respect to Shadok Creek, if we don't have the answer, we can get, so through the chair, we don't have that answer immediately. We can provide that answer to committee.
Okay, and so the back just then to the judicial review, there's actually been a number of different forecasts with this cost. It started at $1 million, then 6, then I think I went to 12, then to 18, now it's at 28. Is the $28 million that's already been drawn from reserve and set aside?
So through the chair, what is reflected in the forecast is council's approved. I believe it's the $25 to $27 million that council has approved to date.
Okay, and you say there has been some money from Shadow Creek. You just not off the top of your head know the amount.
So through the chair, yes. The with respect to the Shadok Creek mandated cleanup, with respect to any future fines or penalties, those have not been assumed in these future forecasts.
Okay, I appreciate that. And so you do show it, you're forecasting now those reserves to climb back up again in 22 or 23 and 24 to a new record level by 24. And that's assuming you're going to have some big year-end surpluses again? Or is that development charges and the completion of the Woodward Avenue sewage treatment plant expansion?
Through the chair, it is, as Councillor Ferguson's reference, it's development charges as reflected in our 2021. The pace of growth, assuming that we maintain the forecasted pace of growth, is those assumptions are reflected as driving factors to 2023, 2024.
Okay, so just a comment. You look at this chart, it paints a pretty rosy, nice picture despite those big hits we've had. And I see now why, staff have managed this so well, why we now have a AAA plus rating. And despite those, if we hadn't had the Red Hill judicial review problem, that'd be another $28 million that could have been back in there. But you're forecasting that we can dig ourselves out of that by 2023. So I appreciate your answers, Mike and Brian. And second, I just want to congratulate you again for the great job you do in managing our finances. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I appreciate the previous speaker's questions. If I could, though, through you, Chair, my question, at least two, was if I could ask Mr. Zagarek or a member of his staff actually to provide a brief summary of what this report is telling us in terms of the status and health of our reserves at present and the forecast, and what factors are at play in each. Thank you.
Through the chair, I'm going to start, and I'll speak with respect to reserves and the importance of reserves for municipalities. And then I'll invite Brian to touch upon the three factors that really drove the 2021 change in reserve balance, as well as future year factors. Just for the benefit of the community, it's important to note that municipalities are reliant on reserves. And we are reliant on reserves, and we are restricted in the way that senior levels of government, federal and provincial governments, are not restricted, in that municipalities cannot have a year-end deficit, nor can city councils approve a deficit budget. And consequently, municipalities from time to time need to turn to reserves to offset those deficits if they were to arise either corporately or within programs. The other restriction municipalities face is that municipalities, unlike the federal provincial governments, cannot issue debt as it relates to operating expenditures. Consequently, we build in reserves and reserve transfers as it relates to the replacement of trucks or vehicles with respect principally towards assets as well as stabilization reserves. We've discussed a bit of stabilization reserves and the importance of stabilization reserves. But as well, this council and other councils have approved principles, for instance, that growth should pay for growth. And consequently, we collect development charges as it relates to funding the infrastructure that's required to facilitate growth. And as well, to the theme of growth with respect to planning and development fees, we too collect fees and charges as it relates to planning and development, such that those activities have a funding source relying less on existing taxpayers and ratepayers. So again, with respect to reserves, reserves are critical instruments for municipalities and municipal councils in order to continue and have continuity of programs and services. It allows municipalities to align financial instruments to priorities and to principles such as the growth should pay for growth, as well as distribution of tax burden across generations. And again, in the case of our reserves, we do leverage from existing taxpayers as it relates to some infrastructure, such as vehicles and equipment, whereby existing taxpayers are benefiting from those assets. So I just wanted to touch upon the significance of reserves, as I know that sometimes outside bodies, either consultants or think tanks, often reference to the richness of municipal reserves. Municipal reserves are critical. Credit rating agencies identify those as one of the key factors in terms of our credit rating, referenced as liquidity. So again, through you, Chair, again, I appreciate the opportunity just to speak to the need for reserves and the importance of reserves. And then I'll invite Director McMullen to speak to some of the key factors, 3 factors in 2021, and some of the factors we're forecasting in 2022. Just before he does that, apologize, Brian, I do want to just remind committee, again, this is a point in time in terms of the 2021 reserve. What is not reflected, and Brian will correct me if I'm wrong, but likely not reflected, is staff reported to council in August of this year with respect to the supply chain and the inflationary pressures. And we leveraged $27 million from reserves to ensure continuity of our programs and our projects because of the supply chain challenges and inflation challenges we're facing in 2022. That's a perfect illustration of the importance of reserves for municipalities. But I do want to highlight that those are likely not reflected in these forecasts, as those were approved by council just in the month of August. So through the chair, apologize for that lengthy introduction. I'll invite Director McMullen to speak to 2021 and 2022.
Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair. Brian McMullen, Director of Financial Planning, Administration and Policy and Corporate Services. Yeah, as Mike indicated, we have to have a cutoff point when we're developing this report. When you look at Appendix A, you'll notice that it's 207 pages, and what we provide to council and the community is, our projections on all of our reserves, to the best of our ability, and we have to have a cutoff point at a particular time. So it's not going to be reflective of everything that's happened prior to today's meeting. So regarding the reserve balances and where it went and where it changed from 2020 to 2021, some of those graphs and slides that Councillor Ferguson was pointing out in the report indicate where some of the changes have occurred. But the primary reasons going from down to up to $1.3 million, $3 billion in 2021 was changes related to development charge. So our collections exceeded our financing of capital projects. That was one of the reasons. And the other reasons major reasons for the change are related to the federal gas tax. So we received more funds in 2021 than we would have spent or allocated to capital projects. And then, as we alluded to earlier, there's a tax operating budget surplus of $34 million that went into reserves. What it also offsets that was some of our funding, over $29 million was used in the rate reserves, about $35 million in this case, for the wastewater improvement subsidy that was previously established. So we used that for that capital project. So that's why the balance went up 12.2% from 2020 to 2021. So going to Councillor Ferguson's questions around the $166 million forecast decline in the reserve in 2022, we make a number of assumptions when we develop those forecasts, and some of the main ones are related to when we're going to spend some of the money in those obligatory reserves. We expect in our forecast to spend about $20 million in the Parkland Dedication Reserve. We expect to spend $21 million from our Safe Restart funds, and we expect to spend $74 million from federal gas tax funds. So we have funds that have been committed and approved in previous budgets. They just hadn't been spent as of the year end. So we expect that those funds are going to be spent in 2022. In all likelihood, those funds may drag out as those projects don't get completed in 2022, and the funds will be then spent in 2023, and we'll give you another update next year. But part of the reason to offset that increase is same thing with the development charge collections exceeding the development charge spending. We expect an increase of $56 million overall in the reserve. And then we take those numbers from 2022 and we sort of expand them out for 2023 and 2024. So that's why it looks like the forecasts then continue to increase in subsequent years. And we use these figures now at the year-end reporting, but we also bring you information during the capital budget and operating budget processes to advise you on where we are on these reserve balances and determine how we can use some of these funds for those to fund some operating programs and also to build up the budgets through the operating budget. There's a number of vehicle and equipment reserves that get built up through the operating budget so that they're sufficient for the replacement of our vehicles and equipment. I think that's all I can add on this.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Is it Councillor Wilson? Are you on the speakers list?
That I really appreciated that overview, but it was my single question. I'm wondering if I could ask two more.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Just a clarification on the $46 million increase in the Canada Community Building Fund due to the one-time increase. Could you help me understand the distinction between the $46 million and that which was brought before this body earlier of the $32 million, which the majority of council allocated $2 million per ward? What is the difference? Where did the difference go between the 46 and the 32? Thank you.
Yeah, so through the chair, Brian McMullen again. So the $46 million increase in the federal gas tax, or we still call it the federal gas tax reserve, even though it's now the Canada Community Building Fund. The increase in the reserve is related to the additional funds that were received, as you mentioned, the additional one-time payment of $32.7 million. But even though those funds were committed and approved, the $30 million was approved, it hadn't been spent by year end. So those numbers are now going to be reflected in the forecast as being spent in 2022, not in 2021. So the reserve balance would have went up significantly because we received the $32 million one-time payment and then our normal regular payment of $32 million. And then it was reduced because we spent $25 million on projects in 2021.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe I'll just return to that offline. If I could ask just one final question, the recommendation to shift the 22,000 capital projects, roads and bridges, to close it and shift it to an unallocated capital levy. Could you just explain to me the rationale for doing that? Thank you.
So through the chair, this is an example when a reserve is created, often at the requirement of federal provincial governments when they provide one-time grant funding. And so this goes back some time when the provincial government had a surplus and provided funding to municipalities for the purpose of roads and bridges. And as we've exhausted the projects as it relates to that reserve, staff are recommending to close out that reserve as it's not a sustainable reserve. It does not have ongoing transfers funding to that reserve. that is the rationale for that recommendation. I just want to quickly point out we have examples of other reserves such as this, whether it's around social housing or some of the social programs that Ontario Works, that we receive one-time funding, we create a reserve. And so from time to time, we will have to close out those reserves as there are not sustainable funding sources.
Thank you very much for that. But just so I supplementary on that, so there's no more incoming fund because that federal fund, for example, no longer exists. But in shifting the remaining 22,000 into unallocated capital, I think you said, that doesn't necessarily mean that remaining 22,000 will be earmarked for roads and bridges. It is, the discretion is it open? And that's my question. Thank you.
Through the chair, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you. First, I want to sincerely thank our finance staff. The complexities of the work that they have to do and all of our finance across the city is incredibly comprehensive. Even more so with all of the changes between the province and the federal government in terms of how we can allocate funding. More recently, interest and inflation is a challenge, and that is where I'd like to hone my questions in. So we're now seeing, while inflation has come down to 7.1%, we're still having to address inflation as it applies to all of our goods and services that we purchase. So how are we allocating sufficient revenue to handle those changes?
So through the chair, let me start with expenditures because that's easier to speak to than the revenues. So as Councillor Clark's identified, with respect to inflation, it does affect municipalities on two fronts, on the operating side and on the capital side. Focusing on the capital side as reserves focus principally on capital, is it has two subsequent impacts to municipalities, and I'll try to illustrate from our August report on inflation supply chain. So with respect to the more immediate need, with respect to continuing on delivering and executing on council-approved projects or programs, we needed to leverage $27 million from reserves. So again, the significance and importance of reserves allows for continuities of programs or projects that would otherwise have to be halted and reprioritized, deferred, or potentially canceled outright. Now, with respect to that approach, the consequence of that approach is a number of those reserves are program reserves. And just to continue on with vehicles and equipment, because those were some of the categories that we reported in August, is those reserves are funded through the operating budget. Each and every year, through the program departments, they budget a contribution to reserves such that at the end of the life of that asset, whether it's 8 years for some vehicles, 12 years for buses, that the city has the financial means to replace those vehicles. Because we've drawn on those reserves, we're going to have to increase that contribution to reserve in the immediate term to replenish the reserve. So that's going to be an operating budget pressure for 2023, 2024, and our hope is that central banks get some control over inflation, and we'll continue to monitor that. So I just wanted to highlight it's not just a capital impact or a reserve impact. There is a operating consequence and a tax consequence, because you can just imagine if a household draws from its bank account and it has to replenish that bank account through, again, deposits to that bank account. And like a household, we behave in the same manner.
And let's address interest, because interest it's a double-edged sword. On one side, you have an increase of your borrowing costs, which I'm not sure what the impact is currently with the municipality, but you also have the benefit of an increase on investments. They don't always balance out. So just a quick insight there, please, Chair, and that's my final question. Thank you, Mike.
So through the chair, and I will touch upon again is again through the financial management is by having the benefit of the upgrade to AAA. There is a benefit in that we will experience a lower cost of borough than we would have as a AA plus. We are expecting to go out with a debenture in 2023 of approximately $70 million. That's our current estimate. And so there will be a higher cost of borrow in 2023 than there is today and than there was 12 months ago. And so that will represent a operating budget pressure because debt financing, again, is reflected on operating budget side. As well on the capital projects, we will have to reflect inflationary pressures when we present the 2023 capital projects. You're familiar with the blocks. We'll have to look at those block allocations and see whether or not those block allocations need to increase to reflect the impact of pressure. And finally, to be balanced, again, the city's credit rating does reflect our very strong liquidity, and strong liquidity, I'm borrowing the credit rating agency's language. And as a result of that strong liquidity, we will earn income with respect to our investments, and so that is a positive. But again, we are restricted under legislation as to the types of investments, very secure investments, and very secure investments, less risk, less reward. And I'm not suggesting that's a negative, but that does limit the potential return for municipalities. So through the chair, I hope I've touched upon each of the areas the councillor has asked about.
Yes, you have, Mr. Zagaric and Chair Pearson. Again, I mean, this council does an awful lot of work through the budget process, but we wouldn't be in the situation of a AAA rating had it not been for our finance staff. I mean, we can always take credit because we support them, but we're not the ones that are doing the number crunching to get us to that AAA. And so I want to thank our finance staff again for helping the city of Hamilton through this challenge.
Thank you, everyone. So with that, can I have a mover and a seconder then? We had a mover and a second, a recorded vote to receive this, to accept this report.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you, everyone. I see Councillor Powers will be leaving shortly, and I apologize that I have another commitment at just about 1:15, so we'll keep moving along. 10.3, Records and Information Management Policy Number FCS 22057 citywide. We have Andrea Holland and Lisa Barroso in attendance. A mover and a second to put this item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Powers. Any questions on this item? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I believe we were discussing this earlier after Mr. Andrus's presentation. I'd like to move that Appendix B.
Okay, we're on 10.3, Records and Information, Councillor.
Oh, my apologies. I'm sorry.
Okay, so no questions in. We'll go to a vote, please, to receive the report.
So Councillor Ferguson has questions.
I'm sorry, flipped over already. Councillor Ferguson?
Oh, was the vote over?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So my only question is to clerks, and so you want to add 2 more staff. What is the extra workload that requires 2 more staff that's different than what we did in previous years?
Lisa?
Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor, Lisa Barroso, Manager of Corporate Records and Access and Privacy. The additional staff, I mean, the clerk's office is not unlike finance, HR. We are support group as well as, we do provide services as well. But, we need to support staff in their records management disciplines, including providing training, onboarding and offboarding training so that we're not losing our information management assets, information assets when employees leave the city's employ. And as well, training is a big thing, supporting departments in maintaining updated file classifications, which is basically a file structure, and retention and their corresponding retention guidelines, as well as, and that includes, having to keep up with legislation. Some retention guidelines are legislated, so we have to research that and support staff with that. Ensuring that the bylaw is updated on a regular basis. Those are the main responsibilities. And again, we're not unlike other service departments, staff servicing departments that require that ability to service staff. We're a large corporation, and we feel that staff need this records management support.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. But everything you mentioned, you've already done. You've always done it, and you listen to Mike. It looks like, thank God, I'm not going to be here. But the 2023 budget is going to be very painful, with a lot of things happening. And so, is there some new legislation that requires you to do more than what you've done in the past to require 2 more staff? And I realize this is being referred to the budget anyway. It's not, we're not approving it today. We're just forwarding it to the budget deliberations. But you've always had a big job. You've always done a lot of work, and I haven't heard you say what's new that I need 2 new additional staff.
So, admittedly, Councillor, through the chair, there isn't anything new. It's the importance of maintaining our corporate records. I think as a corporation, we've done a very good job of maintaining our paper records holdings, but we have very quickly transitioned into maintaining electronic holdings, and staff need to support in, we need to develop some practices. We've got a policy here before you, procedures, practices to ensure that staff are retaining and for the correct periods of time, their records.
Okay, but the problem is, Lisa, I think every department could argue they need more staff to do what they've always done. But this is for a debate for a new council, because it's being referred to the 2023 budget deliberations. Because you're not the only person today asking for more staff, and this could turn into a runaway train. So I'll wait to hear what my colleagues say. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. We have Andrea wanting to respond. Andrea?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair to Councillor Ferguson. In my opinion, I think the management of our paper records is decent. I think the management of our electronic assets is not. When we do an overview of how we are managing our network folders, we see them growing exponentially, and they are going unmanaged. I think there is a real issue when we're doing freedom of information requests and trying to find electronic information assets, especially when we're going back in years, trying to locate information assets that should be easily to find. Currently, a lot of our network folders are unstructured databases. That's how we would refer to them as. It makes it very difficult and very time-consuming to find those information assets that we're looking for, especially when we're coming to matters of litigation and we're going through discovery and we're trying to locate information assets. What we're also finding is that in certain instances, we're looking to external agencies to help us manage those information assets, which comes at a great cost to the organization. I believe when it comes to being responsive and open and transparent, that should include being able to find those information assets easily in order to make them publicly available. And that's something where I think we need significant improvement within the organization. And in order to do that, we are going to require additional staff to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Going to turn to Councillor Clark now.
So the changes that we made to basically do the dissemination of records and information on demand, in essence, active dissemination. Has that increased the workload to our staff?
Through the chair, I'll take a stab at that, Andrea, and if I miss something. Yep. The work related to routine disclosure and active dissemination, that work is ongoing. We've developed initially the information that's available to the public online, one point of access to help the public determine whether, where they can get certain bits of information. But that is an ongoing job. Basically, we have to ensure that those lists are maintained so that the public, when they need to access something, can clearly ensure that we have to maintain those lists of routine disclosure, and that's ongoing. It's an annual thing that our staff have to update.
Thank you for that. And the second question is with regards to the transfer or migration of paper records to electronic records. My understanding in our records division, we have an awful lot of information that is in paper, and we need to migrate it to electronic records. Is that also a part of this 2 FTE request?
It isn't. That's an individual division's requirement, I guess. If they want to transition some of their paper holdings to electronic holdings, that is division specific. We are supporting one division in attempting to do that, but the 2 FTEs are not supporting that work. What I will say to that is either a paper record or an electronic record is a record. There's no need to keep them in both versions, and in some instances, there's no reason to transition the paper to electronic holdings. Both have a life, and you have to determine the added value of changing your paper records into an electronic mode. If you are accessing those records often and it's more efficient for you to access them electronically, then that's fine. But I wouldn't recommend necessarily automatically transforming your paper records into electronic form.
Thank you. That's enlightening.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. With that, now we have the report before us. We had a mover and a seconder. All in favor?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I'll just need another seconder because Councillor Powers has left.
My apologies, sorry. And who moved that? I'm sorry, it was Councillor Ferguson, I think?
Councillor Clark moved it.
And Councillor Johnson then seconding it. Please, all in favor? Oh, okay.
And that vote carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item 10.4 is the Corporate Privacy Program update. Lisa Gain, Manager of Records at FOI, would like to provide committee with an overview on this report. May I have a mover and a seconder first to put it on the floor? Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Johnson. Thank you. Lisa?
Actually, thank you. Through the chair, Lisa Barroso, Manager of Corporate Records and Access and Privacy. I'm actually here just to introduce to you our Corporate Privacy Specialist, Frances Ruffalo. She was hired less than a year ago, and it was through council support to hire an FTE to support a privacy program that we were able to hire Frances. She's worked in privacy since 2004, which was the initiation of the Personal Health Information Protection Act. Her experience spans working in children's mental health, supportive housing and addictions, and the hospital environments. Her work includes supporting implementation of privacy policies and procedures, developing and implementing training and to management staff, physicians, students, performing compliance monitoring activities, and providing subject matter expertise on privacy-related matters. Frances has a master's degree in human development from University of Toronto and a double major honors BA in psychology and health and society from York University. Frances has prepared. This is really a good news report, and she's prepared information on what she has done thus far during her term here and during her time here. And she'll take you through the development of a privacy program that she's implementing. With that, I want to say that we're very pleased to have Frances join the City of Hamilton with all of her expertise. Frances, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, I was going to provide just an overview of the corporate privacy program, so the Appendix A, but I'll put it to the councillors here, whether you'd like an in-depth analysis or an in-depth overview of the values and the outcomes, or a concentration on the practices, which is in the middle section.
Wish of committee. Councillor Wilson? I had Councillor Clark, though, on the speakers list. Councillor Clark, did you wish to comment first?
Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairperson. I want to welcome Frances. I read the report. I took a very large, deep sigh of relief when I read the report. This has been a concern of mine for some time in terms of privacy by design. I have read numerous papers and seen many challenges, court challenges, as a result of the unintentional or intentional release of information that should have been protected. We have a great deal of information that deals directly with taxpayers, businesses, and what they pay, how they pay, all of that information, it needs to be protected. We have a significant amount of records with regards to 7,000 employees, and their information needs to be protected. And so, Frances, sincerely, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad council supported the hiring, and I look forward to you helping this city ensure that our corporate privacy policies and protection are up to date to the best of our abilities. Nothing is perfect, but sincerely, I was truly relieved when I read this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson.
No, I appreciate those comments. Thank you. I'll cede the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Thank you, everyone. So with that, then, are we in a position then to receive the report? It's been moved and seconded. It's on the floor. Thank you. Really appreciate the work, Frances, and certainly welcome you and trust that you will continue to do a great job. So it's on the floor then. Madam Clerk, electronic vote. Thank you. Okay.
Councillor Ferguson, are you able to vote?
Councillor Ferguson?
Oh, excellent.
Thank you.
And that vote carries 5-0.
Thank you, everyone. 10.5, Governance Review Subcommittee Report 22-004, September 9, 2022. An ad was placed in the paper respecting the proposed amendments to the City of Hamilton Procedural Bylaw 21021, and public notice was posted on the city's website at hamilton.ca. Can I have a mover and a second to put this item on the floor? Moved by Councillor Wilson, second by Councillor Johnson. And discussion on this item. I believe there was a change that was going to be made, but I'm seeing, hang on now. Where am I? Okay. Councillor Ferguson, you had your hand up. I'm seeing hands. I'm not seeing speakers list.
Yeah, I didn't have a chance yet to type it out that I have a question, but it was just around the appointment of the one representative to the Hamilton Police Services Board. I believe it's under section 2 and subsection B and C. So it looks like the selection committee will be changed now for the Hamilton Police Services Board to 6 citizens and 5 members of council, which means the citizen appointees will have veto power over the council reps. And I'm just concerned about that because council members are elected by the public and they won't be able to now, they could be overridden with a 6-5 vote by a group of citizens who were appointed by special interest groups. And I just worry that opens up Pandora's box, because does that mean for Hamilton Housing that ACON should have more representatives than council members on the selection committee dealing with the board of Hamilton Housing? So I just worried it opens up Pandora's box. The people in the selection committee should be appointed by the elected people, not by citizens, and particularly not special interest groups. And so I just have trouble with that. I'm not sure how that got changed, and it's only for the one committee, just our one board, just the Hamilton Police Services Board. Yeah. First of all, have I interpreted that right? And second of all, do staff support this?
Turn to Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, Councillor Ferguson, the staff report that came forward only discussed the feasibility of the makeup of a selection committee. Staff came forward with 2 options, alternatives, sort of how this could be feasibly accomplished based on the report that CAR came forward in their recommendations. Staff had 2 options, whether council and committee wanted to either amend the current selection committee, which has all members of council, or whether it was council and committee's wish to create an entirely different selection committee just for the citizen position that sits on the HPSB. Through debate and discussion at the Governance Review Subcommittee, committee decided to create a new selection committee just for the citizen position that sits on HPSB. Staff within the report put in sort of question marks or X's and sort of what the makeup and would be as far as citizen reps versus council reps on that new subcommittee. And committee decided to make it 6 members, of which would be determined, 6 citizen members, which would be determined by CAR and HARC, and the other 5 members of council would of course be appointed at council. It was also determined that that new selection committee would bring forward 2 recommendations to council for decision.
So when you advertise this, will you put down white males need not apply? I just worried this is a slippery slope to go down. I was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question, but
Point of privilege, please. Point of privilege, please.
I don't know what they want. Explain your point of privilege, and we'll find out if it is.
Sorry,
I think the chair has a ruling on this, sir, not you.
So let's just, can we strike that comment, Councillor Ferguson? I appreciate, but we'll strike that comment as inappropriate.
Okay, so I'm just worried then, Madam Chairman.
Madam Chair, I would like a formal apology and it formally withdrawn, please.
Mr. Ferguson?
Okay, I'll continue then.
Will you apologize?
It just paints that picture. So I'm not going to apologize and I'm not going to withdraw it. But it just paints it. But I'm worried about the slippery slope. What are the committees and our special interest groups going to start influencing the people that goes on these respective boards? So I'll leave it at that and just say I have trouble with this.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Councillor Wilson, you still have point of privilege?
I do. Thank you, Chair. It is extremely unfortunate that that kind of language and terminology is used, and I take exception to it. I also take exception to the notion that these are special interest groups. I'd like to remind the individual member of council that in December of last year, this body, all of council, voted in support of a hate prevention, mitigation, and community initiatives action plan. And I'll just, in nowhere in that plan would we, or have we, nor could we, use the term special interest group to refer to equity deserving groups that this committee and this body has made a commitment to recognize and to act. And to that end, there is a specific reference in that report to commit to these sorts of deliberations that will enable our institution to remain responsive to groups that are not special interests, but that have historically been excluded, precluded, discriminated against, subjected to racism, misogyny. And I just think it's really, really unfortunate that that kind of language is being used in this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, we'll go on now. I have Councillor Johnson.
This is on a different item on the report. Am I process-wise okay to go ahead?
I'll just hold on to you, Councillor Clark. Is this on the same vein or a different item on the report?
It was on the same item that Councillor Ferguson and Councillor Wilson addressed.
Okay, then I'll go to you and come back to Councillor Johnson, sir.
So I think I heard you ask the good councillor to withdraw the comment.
Yes, I did.
And apologize. So for all intents and purposes, the comment was out of order. The intent of the governance committee, the hope of the governance committee was to find some type of collaboration. I'm worried that council is going to take the position that the selection committee process that we currently have be in place. So the question that I have to the clerk, is it possible to have, for this item alone, a community committee that would make endorsements or recommendations of possible citizen committee members to the Police Services Board? The concern that we heard very loud from the racialized community and marginalized community is that they want to be a part of this process. That's clearly what I heard in the governance meeting. And so ideally, as I try to do from time to time, create pragmatic collaboration so that we can move forward. Is it possible that the amendment would be such that there's a citizen committee that would put forth recommendations of possible names to the council selection committee for their deliberation? I'm springing this on you and I apologize, but I think I heard Councillor Ferguson is quite concerned about this, and I'm concerned that there are going to be other councillors that are going to be in the same boat. I'm trying to find a way to ensure that we still have that inclusion.
Through the chair. So on page 2 of the report, of your governance report, I'll draw your attention to item C. It states that the Committee Against Racism and the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, so that's CAR and HARC, recommend the appointment of 6 community representatives on the Hamilton Police Services Board Selection Committee for the recruitment of 1 person appointed by resolution of council to the Hamilton Police Services Board of council for council's consideration. So they are recommending the appointment of the 6 people who are going to sit on this selection committee.
And the selection committee would be councillors, elected councillors, and non-elected citizen members to come to a consensus in terms of who they wish to appoint. Are they appointing 1 person? Are they appointing a few people for council to consider? How is that going to flow?
So within the discussion at governance agreed with the CAR report that this special selection committee bring forward 2 recommended names to council for approval. So they are not appointing anybody, they are making 2 recommendations to council. It is absolutely council's decision whether to either accept or change or whatever. As with all appointments, it's up to council to decide.
Yes, I understand that. Can I ask another question in terms of an option? And I'm leaning on my experience with the Joint Stewardship Board, which Councillor Pearson and I sit on. So there's 3 Haudenosaunee representatives, there's 3 City Council representatives, and it's consensus based. So is it possible to have this amended to 5 citizen appointees, 5 council appointees, and then that body would come to a consensus in terms of the appointees moving forward?
Through the chair, so I've never known a committee of council to work through consensus. It's always been through voting. I know in the discussion in governance, I had made a recommendation that it be 6 and 5, only so that when you're doing your voting, there is a determination of the decision, and that's generally how they work. I'm not familiar with the decision-making at JSB. It's something we would have to explore. But I'm only familiar with committees of council where there is voting and there's a firm recommendation coming forward to council.
Is there a prohibition on advisory committee or selection committees having a consensus model rather than the majority rules?
Through the chair, it's not something I'm familiar with. I'd have to go away and do a little bit of research on that.
Thank you. I think there's value to trying to find a way to ensure that racialized residents, marginalized residents, LGBTQ residents can make recommendations for appointees to the police board. I'm not sure how that would work. This is one recommendation that came out of governance. But I think there is a real concern in the community that they're lacking representation on the police service board, and they're wanting the next appointee to have some lived experience to share that on the police service board. How we get there, I'm not sure. As we go forward into the new term of council, is the police service board the same as any other board or agency, that they would remain serving until they're replaced, which would give the new council the opportunity to wrestle with this issue?
Through the chair, this is something that can absolutely be referred to the next council. We won't be doing the recruitment immediately to do the replacement, so there can be a pause. I do, and maybe Janet would know exactly which subcommittees we do have. We do have other subcommittees where we have non-voting membership. So we do have, and Elsie McRae may have an example too. I'm trying to think of, I know there's a couple on hand, where we do have members of the community that sit and can discuss, but they do not have voting rights.
The Hamilton Conservation Authority pops to mind because I've been thinking there's 5 councillors and 5 citizen members, and it has worked incredibly well for decades. So there is a precedence for this type of arrangement. I'd like to hear from the rest of the committee members, but if we can't come to a resolution today, then it might be appropriate to refer it to the new council and have them make the final determination. Again, I feel torn about making this decision that would force the new council to follow a certain direction that they didn't participate in the decision making. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you, if I could please, to Clerk Holland or Deputy Clerk Pilon, could you, in the report that was deliberated at some length at Governance Subcommittee, one of the appendices provided a search of other models. And I believe in that appendix, there was a model, a reference made to the City of London that has a citizen-led selection committee. And I'm wondering if you could please recall that. And if I'm correct in that, if you could detail that for us, please, and thank you.
Yes, it's Janet Pilon, Deputy Clerk. The London Police Services Board has a striking committee that's composed of members identified in their general policy for advisory committees. And the general policy currently provides that the striking committee be composed of the past members of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee, representatives of Pillar Nonprofit Network, representatives of Urban League of London, representative of London and District Labour Council, representative of London Chamber of Commerce, citizens at large selected by the outgoing municipal council. And they meet and make recommendation for the initial citizen appointments to the boards, commissions, and advisory committees in the City of London.
Thank you through you, Chair. Thank you to the Deputy Clerk for providing that overview of an existing model that works and makes recommendations. So there is a model out there that is active and functioning. This would not be breaking new ground per se. If I could just seek clarification on the recommendation that would be forthcoming from this recommended, as it's set out in the Governance Committee report, the recommendation would come to Council. Is the final decision on who that selection would be, does it rest with the selection committee or does it rest with the elected council, please, and thank you.
Through the chair, all recommendations for appointment go to council.
Thank you for providing that clarification. I think it is important to the concern that council is elected and some of these members would not. Ultimately, the decision rests within the domain of an elected and accountable council. That council can accept or reject that deliberation, and they would have the benefit of having members who participated and sat on and could provide insight into the deliberation. So in terms of democratic accountability, it does rest with the elected council. If I could turn your attention, members, to a report that was deliberated and approved of by this body, and if I could, through you, Chair, is an unfair question of me, but would Ms. Morgenstall be available, or is she presently in council chambers?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, I'm here on the line virtually.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Director Stahl. Director Stahl, could you just remind the public and this body of the report that was received in December 2021? The report subject is Hate Prevention, Mitigation, and Community Initiatives Action Plan. Could you just provide a brief summary, if you could, on what was that report about and why did it come forward? Thank you.
Certainly. Yeah, I can, through the chair to members of council, I can speak to that report that came forward on December 8th. I believe it was at General Issues Committee. And I can also speak to the alignment between that report and the recommendations we're seeing here that came through the governance subcommittee. So perhaps as a start, the importance of that report was an action plan associated with the city's hate prevention, mitigation, and our community initiatives program. Members of council may recall that we enlisted the support of Sage Solutions to do extensive community consultations, and their response in those community consultations was essentially 8 recommendations to the city in order to ensure better relationships with community, in addition to furthering our external equity, diversity, and inclusion goals, which were also in alignment with the term of council priorities. So throughout the hate mitigation report, there was a series of recommendations about how we could execute that action plan, and what good governance and good relationship building would look like with equity deserving communities. HARC, No Hate in the Hammer, HCCI, a number of community partners were listed in that report. And as a few of the recommendations that council may recall, called on changes within community, within the city's policies, within granting structures, and within representation, and emphasized how important that representation is from community and decision making. So when we look at CAR's recommendations to the governance committee, it is very much in alignment with the city's hate prevention, mitigation, and community initiatives action plan. And I would say that on behalf of the government relations and community initiatives team, staff do support these recommendations. And just as a point of clarity, this isn't a recommendation that there are more community members on the actual police board. These recommendations are about the actual selection committee of the community appointee. So I know there's been a series of conversations about this, and some have been confused about a number of 6 community members on the police board. This is actually about the selection committee of the community appointee. So I just wanted to reiterate that, and hopefully that answers your questions, Councillor Wilson. Just as a last final thought, I would also just caution on the non-voting member and that language. We want to ensure that these community members have a seat at the table and that their voice is being heard. So I hope it's appropriate for me to state that, but I think that it is important that their voices are being heard and that they have a seat at the table on the selection committee.
Thank you very much to Director Stahl. I really appreciate that in-depth and rich overview. I would like to, Chairperson, just read something that was referenced in that report that this body passed in December of last year. And it references, I believe, a recommendation report that this body supported unanimously. And I'd like to read it now. The community engagement that informed Sage Solutions report made a call for the city to increase its efforts to listen to community voices and amplify their messages, support community groups in their work, proactively build relationships with communities that are experiencing hate. These efforts could include involving and inviting marginalized community members to decision-making tables. We supported that report. We've supported this report in December. We have a series of advisory groups that we ask for advice. This is before us. It was deliberated. We had delegations at Governance Subcommittee, and the Governance Subcommittee supported this recommendation and this direction. At a time of increasing polarization in our democracies, what we're hearing from equity-deserving groups is not that they're rejecting the institution. They want in. They want to be part of. They're underscoring the legitimacy of these very public and important institutions, and they want a seat at the table, and they recognize that the ultimate decision is within the domain of an elected council. I think that is something at a time when our institutions are under threat that we should be embracing and championing in this city. They want to come to the table. They want to be part of this deliberation. That is an amazing accomplishment and a statement of authenticity and legitimacy. And I think we would be extremely short-sighted if we rejected this direction that has come to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, and again, I apologize. I'm not sure, Madam Clerk, how I'm going to handle this. I have to be at another pressing issue for 1:15. I just want to make sure everyone's aware. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm going to support this recommendation that came from governance because the recommendation came from the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center and the Committee Against Racism, which are two bodies that we create as a council. I suspect we're going to hear from other councillors who are concerned that they're the elected members and they should not have less representation on this selection committee than the citizen members. In my mind, if it was switched to 5 and 5 or 6 and 6, what that is going to do is, I hear the clerk, you're going to have tie votes. But if that committee is going to put forth a name to the city council for selection, then they are going to have to work together. They are going to have to listen to the people who are applying for that position, review their CVs prudently together, and come to a collaborative decision together. If not, their recommendations will continue to be defeated at that committee. I think what happens at the Hamilton Conservation Authority is prudent here. 5 and 5, it works very well. I think at the JSB, we have 3 and 3, 3 Haudenosaunee members and 3 city councillors, and it's designed by its makeup to be about trust, respect, and friendship, and it's designed by its makeup to force the 6 members to come to a consensus or the decision does not go forward. I'll be prepared at council if I sense that this is going down to defeat, or if it actually does get defeated, to amend it to make it an equal number of citizen and council appointees. I think it's important that when we go through all of this process to deal with hate mitigation in our community, which is real. It's not a dream. And we hear the concerns of our racialized community members and residents who find discrimination in our community, not their community, in our community. We have to pay attention to it. And we've spent a great deal of money trying to get a fair recommendation moving forward to move this city forward. So, as I said, I'm going to support the recommendation today. I hope it passes so that council can make that determination. If it doesn't pass today, then I will amend it accordingly, or I will amend it at council. But one way or the other, we need to build a bridge, and we can't build that bridge alone. We have to build that bridge together so that we can walk that path together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And I know Councillor Johnson, were you on this? I think you were on this item, were you not, Councillor Johnson? And then I've got Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. Not initially, but I do want to speak to the, sorry, no, I'm not on this item. It's on another item. How's that?
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. And I appreciate Councillor Clark's comments. The Conservation Authority is a good benchmark for this with 5 citizens, 5 members of council, and it's a very engaged board and it works well. I do try very hard to practice EDI. I think I do. I think my record shows that. But when you slant the vote where to a 6-5 vote, it makes it uncomfortable. It jumps off the page at you. That I would like to make sure that the marginalized people do get a voice. I think that's good. And so I would be supportive of an amendment if Councillor Clark wants to put it, and I'd be happy to second it, to change it from 6 and 5 to 5 and 5, which is demonstrated it works, and you get consensus. And if it does get a tie vote, it then goes off to council as a tie vote, and see where it goes there. So I'd rather have it amended here today. Otherwise, I'll oppose it, rather than at council. And so it was Councillor Clark's suggestion, so if he could move it, I'd be happy to second it.
Councillor Clark, the offer's out.
I appreciate the offer. I think I'm going to support this recommendation and have that discussion at council with respect to Councillor Ferguson. I understand his position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, so that's off then. Councillor Brenda Johnson.
Totally different subject, ma'am, on the same report.
Governments, yes.
Thank you. So I would like to move that Appendix B 5.11, order of business, that delegations, which is labeled as H, becomes G, and that staff presentations, which is currently G, become H. In other words, we're moving delegations above staff presentations. And that way it can go to council, and then everybody at council. It's been seconded by Councillor Clark or Councillor Wilson, either one.
Clark is seconding it. Thank you.
And it goes to council, and council as a whole can make that decision.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So we have an amendment then. That's Councillor Johnson's amendment on the floor. Madam Clerk, can we vote on that? Moved by Councillor Johnson, second by Councillor Clark.
Just one moment. I'm just just putting it out. And Councillor Ferguson, are you able to vote?
Thank you, everyone. That carries. Now on the report as amended.
The vote is out. And that vote carries 4-1.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, sorry. Next, we're going to move on to item 10.6 is Procurement Subcommittee Report 22-001, September 12th. Mover and a second to put this item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Clark. And are there any discussion items on that? Any concerns? So we'll go Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I'm obviously, as the chair of the committee, very supportive of the motion for the small changes to the procurement policy. But we had quite a discussion at committee about how to deal with escalating prices mid-contract. And we had a good example of that was for the chlorine supply, where the supplier couldn't get it because prices have escalated so much. And of course, chlorine is such a critical component to our water treatment plant. But we had a good discussion about what happens when the wind blows the other way, because we're seeing a lot of a big drop in fuel prices at the gas pump, because there's a lot of people that were requesting fuel surcharges. But what happens when it comes to our attention that we are paying significantly more than the market because something was tendered at the wrong time, because we are into dropping commodity prices that are happening at the lumber is probably the best example. It's gone down more than half, if that's even possible from what I'm told. And so we've asked staff to come back with a formula that could go both ways. If the price goes up after tendering, what's the formula? But the exact same formula will apply if the price goes down. And so MTO has that for asphalt cement, which is an oil product. It's the glue that holds the aggregate together on a pavement, and it fluctuates terribly. And they have a very interesting formula. It calculates how many liters the trucks delivering the aggregate to the asphalt plant would consume, how many liters the asphalt plant would consume, because it burns about 5 liters per ton in order to heat the aggregate to get to the right temperature to place it. And then, of course, the trucks delivering it to the job site, then all the equipment that are placing it and compacting it. And that one goes both ways. It's based on the rack price of oil at the time the tender went in, and then you go plus or minus based on this very complex formula about how many liters is being used per ton of asphalt. And so we've challenged staff at the committee. It's in the information section because it was direction to staff to come up with one that'll help us when the winds blow the other way and make sure that the taxpayer is protected. So, Madam Chairman, I just putting that out there to draw attention to it so people understand it. I know Tina is very challenged by that request. How am I going to do this? And I'd give her the asphalt cement example, which she was aware of. She knew about that with the province. And when I was chairman of our president of the Ontario Road Builders, we actually negotiated and put that process in place. So that'll be something for the new council to chew on when they meet into 2023. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that overview, Councillor, and appreciate all that work. So it's before us. Electronic vote, please.
Waiting on your vote, Chairperson.
Oh, it's not coming up. Okay. It's not coming up. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That vote carries 5-0.
All things me to hold it up when I've got to leave. Or there's no motions. We have no notices of motions, general information, nothing, private and confidential. Motion to adjourn. Before we do, I want to thank Madam Clerk, all the clerks today that are in attendance and who come periodically before us, and staff. Excellent job. It's been a tough term. We've dealt with a lot of issues, and certainly thank you to my colleagues for staying on target and online at committee meetings. Thank you, everyone.
And to you, Madam Chairman, I just want to congratulate you for serving the year as AFNA. I know I did it the previous year, and it's a big load to add on top of what we normally do.
Thank you,
They
Chair.
look like short agendas, but they're huge items.
They're huge. They're huge items, and just the incredible finance staff. I'm just impressed by them every day, and it was such a pleasure working with them.
Absolutely.
Over the last 4 years, and I wish the new council well.
Thank you. So I'm going to say moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Brenda Johnson. Johnson, adjournment, please. There we go. Thank you again, everyone. I'm going to make it in time.
Thank you, Chair. That vote carries 5-0. Thank you, everyone.